How are you feeling?
Well.
How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you here?
That's difficult to answer.
Could you give me some idea?
Offhand, I can't.
Whose idea was it that you come here?
A psychiatrist.
And what happened that ended up with your being here in the hospital?
The psychiatrist decided that this was the situation for me.
Did he tell you why?
No, the psychiatrist did not.
Has anybody told you why?
No.
Have you any idea why?
Yes.
And what is that?
I am not completely like other people.
What do you mean by that?
People dislike me because I am not completely like them.
And in what way are you different?
I am trying to do with my life something which few people try to do. And this influences my thinking and consequently my actions.
What is it you're trying to do with your life?
Play the piano for people.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
I sit differently when I play the piano, and when I'm away from the piano, I occasionally look differently from other people, and this has caused dislike from people.
They dislike you because you sit differently at the piano?
Yes.
What way do you sit at the piano that people would dislike you?
I cannot describe an illustration of how I sit.
And I can't imagine it, that it would make people angry at you or at least dislike you. How do you know they dislike you?
My father does, and doctors do, because of the way I appear in relationship to the way I sit at the piano, and occasionally stand when I'm away from the piano because of the way I sit at the piano.
How do you stand when you're away from the piano that they dislike you?
I can't describe an illustration.
Does it feel to you any different from the way other people stand?
Yes, it feels different.
In what way?
This is becoming too involved to describe.
Would I be right in assuming then that you don't feel that you belong in the hospital, but that other people did feel that?
As soon as I express the belief that I do not belong in this hospital, which is a mental hospital, then those who dislike me want to find a worse place for me.
I'm not sure I understand. Could you make that clearer for me?
No.
Is this a way of...
A hospital? Yes, I can. As soon as I express the...
Grammarly does more than catch errors. With Grammarly, you can find really good, no, perfect words that make your writing sharp or explicit or...
belief that I do not belong in this mental hospital, then those who dislike me want to find a hospital where the living conditions are not as good as this.
But why are you in the hospital in the first place? I'm not clear.
Because I'm working to do something which in my life which most people do not do. This influences my thinking and occasionally my actions, and a psychiatrist has noticed this.
What has he noticed?
Likes the actions and the thinking and has decided that I should be here to change them.
What actions?
How I talk and how I look right at this moment.
And how would you describe the way you're talking and looking right at this moment?
As other people talk, and at this moment, however, I've been told that it is not the way other people talk and look.
Have you any idea in what way it's not like others?
No, because I believe it is as other people talk.
So then, from your point of view, not from other people's point of view, from your point of view, you look, you talk, you think, you behave as other people do. You're very interested in learning to play the piano. You sit at the piano a little differently from the way someone else might, and you stand somewhat differently.
Occasionally I stand differently.
Now that in itself doesn't seem on the surface to be sufficient reason for being in a hospital. So what other reasons have been given to you, or what other reasons do you understand are the causes of your being here?
I'm supposed to not be mentally well.
Oh. And what's supposed to be wrong with you?
No doctor has told me.
It's hard to believe.
I tell the truth.
What are your plans? If things should go well, if you were to leave the hospital, then what?
I need financial help from my father to prepare me for obtaining a job as a piano instructor at a university where I will be able to teach people how to play the piano and also play the piano for people.
Have you had the training yet to permit you to be an instructor?
No, I have not.
Have you tried?
I don't understand what you mean by...
Have you tried to get the instruction?
Yes, I have tried.
What's happened?
I have not had the correct environment for the instruction, nor the correct financial help for the instruction, nor the correct instruction.
Have you been accepted for such instruction?
By some teachers, yes.
And by others, no?
Yes. Again, it has been about half and half.
Have you started any such instruction with those who did approve of it?
Yes.
And how has it gone?
With some it has gone well, with some it has not gone well.
It back to 1. All right, so that's the basics of lighting in Unreal Engine 5. Now we're going to move on to a case study of lighting an architectural visualization scene. First, we're going to be lighting it with movable and lumen, and then we're going to light that same exact scene, but using static lights and baked lighting. So we'll be able to compare the pros and cons of both methods. Also, if you want to stay up to date in the world of Unreal Engine 5 news, then don't forget to check out the Unreal Sensei newsletter, link in the description below. It is a weekly newsletter that goes over all the big news within Unreal Engine 5 and also has some exclusive tutorials. So go ahead and check that out. Now, with all that out of the way, let's jump into our architectural visualization scene. So the particular ArcViz scene we're going to be lighting is, if I go Control and Space, it is under Lighting Examples Maps, and it's right next to the map that we've been editing. It is the ArcViz room. So if we double click on this, let's go Save Selected. We will notice that this ArcViz room is completely black. There is nothing inside of here. But if we go into, let's go unlit mode, if you remember, we can see our different view modes by coming up here. We can see that our scene is actually populated. It just, there wasn't any lights within it. So let's start to slowly add in some lights. So of course, let's first start off with a directional light. So I'm going to come up to Create, Lights, and Directional Light. And let's just drag it in just like this, and let's rotate around until it's actually going into my scene like this. And we'll notice that immediately our global illumination is working. Our directional light is coming through our window right there and is bouncing all around the room, lighting my room up. So we could just maybe angle it just a bit like this. And let's make sure we set this to movable. And let's give ourselves a sky, because that's kind of weird. You know, we're minding our own business within this room, and we look outside the window and it is pitch dark. So to do so, of course, I'm going to come up to Create. Let's go add in Visual Effects and Sky and Atmosphere. And then within my sunlight, I will click on my sunlight, scroll all the way down to Atmosphere and Clouds, and make sure Atmosphere Sunlight is checked on. That's how we'll actually be able to see our sky. And as soon as I check this on, we get our sky. So this looks pretty nice. There's only one issue, and that is the bottom half of my world. It is completely black. So we can fill this black void with some fog by coming up to Create, Visual Effects, and let's drag in an exponential height fog. So there we go. I can just leave it as is. And now my scene is just looking like it's white, and that's just a generic sky outside of my scene. Also, you might notice, and that is if I hide and unhide this exponential height fog by clicking on the eye icon, so I can hide it, unhide, hide it, unhide. That fog is actually within my room right now, and we don't want fog within the room. So I'm going to come into exponential height fog, and all the way up here, where it says start distance, I'm just going to increase the start distance to its max of 5,000. That's so when I hide and unhide this fog, there is no fog within my room, and we get that full range of colors. Now let's go add in a skylight. That's how we can continue to add some more light bouncing into my room from this window. So I'll come up to Create, Lights, let's drag in a skylight, and let's make this skylight, let me increase it right here. Let's make it movable and real-time capture. And then under the intensity scale, we can increase the intensity, the brightness of our skylight. So let's try 1, 2, 4, and I think I like it at 4, so I'll just leave it there right now, and that's how there's more skylight within my scene. And let's increase the quality of my lighting right now. So let's go into Create, Visual Effects. Of course, we'll drag in a post-process volume. I will go all the way down here, and within Infinite Extent Unbound, I'll make sure that this is checked on. That's how my post-process volume is affecting everything. Fog within the room. So I'm going to come into exponential height fog, and all the way up here, where it says start distance, I'm just going to increase the start distance to its max of 5,000. That's so when I hide and unhide this fog, there is no fog within my room, and we get that full range of colors. Now let's go add in a skylight. That's how we can continue to add some more light bouncing into my room from this window. So I'll come up to create, lights, let's drag in a skylight, and let's make this skylight, let me increase it right here. Let's make it movable and real-time capture. And then under the intensity scale, we can increase the intensity, the brightness of our skylights. So let's try 1, 2, 4, and I think I like it at 4, so I'll just leave it there right now, and that's how there's more skylight within my scene. And let's increase the quality of my lighting right now. So let's go into Create, Visual Effects, and of course we'll drag in a post-process volume. I will go all the way down here, and within Infinite Extent Unbound, I'll make sure that this is checked on. That's how my post-process volume is affecting everything. And then within Global Illumination, let's increase the final gather quality from 1 to 2. So you might have not noticed that big of a difference, but if we increase this, so if we increase this from 1 all the way down to 0.25, we notice our room looks extremely noisy, but our room is probably a lot more performant now. We're probably getting some more FPS, so it's a trade-off, but I'm just going to keep that 2 right now because I want the max quality possible. Then I'm going to go ahead and let us lock our exposure value. So within metering mode, let's change it from auto exposure histogram to manual. And then for exposure compensation, I will increase this to, let's say, 12.25. Okay, so that is pretty much the gist of how you would light a scene using just using movable lights and lumens. If we see right here, if I zoom in, we get some really nice indirect shadows. And even if I move this around, we can see those shadows moving with it. And if I add in a spear, so let's add in a spear to my scene just right there. Let's go Control Space, Materials. And I'm going to drag on the color red right on that spear. We will see that this spear is projecting light, especially right here. It's really noticeable. We're getting a lot of bounce light all over my scene completely in real time. So that is amazing, but we can improve this scene. So let's say if you're in architectural visualization and you don't plan on using any movable lights, well, you can get better quality still out of baking your lights. So keep that in mind that while lumens is amazing, if your lights are going to be completely stationary, your objects aren't moving, you might as well bake your lights because you'll get a lot better quality shadows and color maps, while at the same time drastically increasing the performance of your game. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to convert this scene from lumens to a stationary light build. Also, you probably notice, especially I think right here, pay attention to the top right-hand corner. There's some weird artifacting, especially right there. That's because Lumen isn't perfect. Of course, you're going to have a lot of trade-offs when you're getting real-time global illumination. Lumen is a combination of several different global illumination techniques, and it works pretty well, but of course, it's not perfect. So, baking lights into texture maps have been here since forever, and they're still the best way to get global illumination. So, I'm going to press Control and Space, and let's go into Maps, and I'm going to go duplicate this ArcViz room. So, I'm going to go press Control and W to duplicate. And let's call this ArcViz Room Baked. Just like that. And let's double click and let's go into here. So now I'm going to go select my lights. So let me select my directional light. We're going to go into details and we're going to set it from movable to stationary. Just like that. And I'm also going to go ahead and let's grab my skylight and also set this from movable to stationary. Since then, nothing will happen if we press baked because we don't have any lights to actually bake, since when we have a light set to movable, that won't be baked. Now, if we go into our post-process volume, we can scroll all the way down here and let's turn off lumens. So I'll select method, lumen, and I'll select none. And also within reflections, let's also select none, just like that. And now I'm going to come up here to build and build all levels, and let's see what lighting we get right off the bat. And this lighting looks absolutely terrible. This is what we're going to be going over within this part of the tutorial. We will go over all the different settings we can adjust to make our stationary light builds better. So we're going to first start off by telling Unreal where I want my light rays to be directed at. Because right now, Unreal doesn't really know where they should send their light rays. It's just going to send light rays all over my world. And I specifically want them to be directed at this window, since this window is where the vast majority of the lighting of my scene is going to be coming from. And we can do that with light mass importance volumes and light mass portals. So I can add a light mass importance volume by coming up to create. Under volumes, I can just drag out a light mass importance volume right here. And I want to make sure that this volume is encompassing my entire level. So I just press G to get back all my editor widgets. And now I'm scaling my box. That's how it will encompass my room just like this. Now I'm going to add in a light mass portal. So I'm going to come up to create. And then under all classes, I have to scroll down just a bunch until we get to the light mask section. And within here, we'll see that there's something called light mask portal. I'm just going to telling Unreal where I want my light rays to be directed at. Because right now, Unreal doesn't really know where they should send their light rays. It's just going to send light rays all over my world. And I specifically want them to be directed at this window, since this window is where the vast majority of the lighting of my scene is going to be coming from. And we can do that with light mass importance volumes and light mass portals. So I can add a light mass importance volume by coming up to create. Under volumes, I can just drag out a light mass importance volume right here. And I want to make sure that this volume is encompassing my entire level. So I just press G to get back all my editor widgets. And now I'm scaling my box. That's how it will encompass my room just like this. Now I'm going to add in a light mass portal. So I'm going to come up to create. And then under all classes, I have to scroll down just a bunch until we get to the light mask section. And within here, we'll see that there's something called light mask portal. I'm just going to drag this out into my world. And I want it to encompass this window right here. So I'm going to make sure that my snapping is turned on to every 10 degrees and rotate this 90 degrees just like that. And scale and move it. That's how it encompasses my entire window. So what the light mask portal is going to do is that it's going to tell Unreal to direct the light rays right at this window here. So when it is roughly covering my window, I'm going to come back into here. And now let's build our lighting. Okay, so this was a little bit of an improvement, but obviously we still have a long way to go. One thing we could do is change some of the light mask settings within our world settings. So if you do not have a world settings tab, you want to come up to Windows and click on world settings right here. And within world settings, we can control the settings of our baked lighting. And keep in mind, in Unreal Engine, the process of baking light is called light mask. So under light mask and light mask settings, we get the option to control just a bunch of different parameters. So one thing I think I'll do is that I'll increase the number of indirect bounces from 3 to 10. And then I will increase the bounces of my skylight right here from 1 to 10. And then we can drastically increase the scale at which Unreal Engine is tracing with light photons right here with the static lighting level scale. So 1 is pretty big. What I want to do is I want to bring this down from 1 to 0.1. Now, this is going to cause a lot more artifacts. So the way we can compensate for this artifact is that down here within indirect lighting quality, I will change this from 1 to 10. So that will increase the quality and get rid of some of the artifacts that are being produced from the static lighting level scale being decreased from 1 to 0.1. And then just for this scene, I found an indirect lighting smoothness of 1.3 to be really good. Now, once we build our lighting will take a lot longer to calculate, and that's because we drastically increased our settings here. So depending on your computer, this might take a while. So I'm going to come up here to build and let us build my levels, and I'm going to go skip ahead because this might take a while. Now we are back, and the lighting does look a little bit better, but I think I'm going to have to come into post-process volume. And within the details panel, let us decrease this exposure because that is a little bit too intense. So I think I'll keep it at 11.8 for now. And now if we zoom up, especially on like my objects right here, actually let's go into lit and let's go to lighting only. We will notice that our light bakes still look really bad. And that's because the resolution at which our light bakes are being saved at is really, really low right now. And we can see what our resolution is by coming up to lighting only, coming down all the way here to optimization view modes, and then clicking on light map density. So by clicking on this, we can see the density at which our light masks, our shadows and bounce lighting is being saved, and this is insanely low. So this is why our quality is pretty much looking really bad right now. So the way we can increase this is that we want to click on the object that we want to increase our resolution. And if we scroll down under lighting, we could do override light map resolution. So if I check this like this, we could increase it from, let's say, 64 to 128. And keep in mind, I'm going to be increasing these at powers of 2 because Unreal recommends to save them at powers of 2. And it's just better for memory if we do it that way. You don't have to. You could, let's say, you can make this something like 148, but I think I'll just keep these like 128 for now. And if we now click away from this chair, we can see that we went from bluish green all the way to red orange. So I'm just going to increase all the static meshes here. That's how they look, either red or orange, so that we get some more resolution at which we can save our shadows at. So for the floor right here, let's change this from 64 to 256. Actually, I'll make this one 512. And let me click on the wall. Let's go make this one also 512. And then there's a little pattern in the back. It was at 256. Let's also make this 512. The roof, I think I will make this 256. I don't have to be that dense with the roof. And then with the baseboard, let's increase this from 64 to 256. And back here, I'll just click on this. And let's also increase this one to 256. And for the door, I think I'll bring up the door to 128. And for this table, 128, let's make this table 256. Okay, so now my scene is looking a lot better. Actually, I think I'll make the bottom here instead of 512. Let's make this 1024. And that's just because I want to really show off the indirect shadows that will be produced from our light mass. And now that our light map density has been drastically increased, now let's build, but with higher quality shadow maps and bounce lighting. So we'll come up to build all levels, and now this should take a while. And my light baking just finished, and we will notice that my scene looks a lot nicer if I come into lit. Let's go into lighting only, and if I zoom in here, we can see that we are getting a little bit of indirect shadows, and there's some changes I can do to go ahead and increase the lighting. But I think right now I will come into my post-process volume and let us scroll all the way up here to, and underneath rendering features, ambient occlusion, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to turn off my ambient occlusion, take it from 0.5 all the way down to 0. And the reason why is because I'm letting ambient occlusion be baked by our light mass. So we don't need some ambient occlusion turned on within the post-process volume. And I'm going to scroll back up here. Let's go into exposure, and I'm going to lower this from 11 to 10, actually to 10.5, 10.8. Okay, I think I'm going to keep it at 10.8 for now. And then I'm going to go and add in a reflection capture, because we'll notice that if we zoom in, especially on our chair and on our little props, the reflection on them looks absolutely terrible. And that's because our reflections aren't taking into account the actual room that they're in. The reflections are just grabbing whatever reflection is being captured by the skylight, which is not what we want. So we want to override the skylight reflections with, if I come up to create, visual effects, and spear reflection capture. So I'll drag that out, and immediately that's been fixed. So instead of grabbing the reflections that are being produced from the skylight, it will grab the reflection that is being caught by the reflection capture. And the reflection capture is similar to the skylight in that this is going to take a 360-degree panoramic view of my scene and then project that view as a reflection onto any objects that are near it. And we can also override this one right here with a smaller one. So I'll just drag from here, and I'll just add another reflection capture. That's going to be over my props. That's how our reflections are just a little bit more realistic. So I believe now it's time for our final bake. So before we do a final bake, keep in mind that this will take the longest bake out of everything we've done. So if your computer has been taking a slow time baking all the previous ones, this one is going to be a little bit longer. So instead of going up to build and going to build all levels, we can go into lighting quality and increase the lighting quality from preview to either medium, high, or production. So each of these will be drastically increase our time, but at the same time, they will increase the quality of our bake. So I think I'm just going to keep it at medium for now. So make sure I select a medium, and then I'm going to come up to build, and with build set to medium, we're going to go ahead and build all levels, and this should be the final build. Okay, so our light bake looks a lot better, and I think I'm going to come in my post-process volume, and let's increase that exposure compensation to 11.5. So I'll just leave 11.5. You can choose whichever one you want. And actually, let's make this 11.7. And I'm also going to go ahead and let's increase the bloom just a bit from 0.675 to 1. So now here is our final quality light build. We can see if I come up right here, we get some really nice soft shadows, really realistic. Everything's looking great. And pretty much this is the gist of how you would go ahead and light bake a scene using stationary lights. So this is another way of getting global illumination. And honestly, this way of getting global illumination, while all the lights are stationary and you can't move objects around, if we go into my other scene, my stationary light scene obviously looks a lot nicer than just using lumen, but it's good to know that there are two options to get global illumination. You will pick one depending on the need of your project. So that's just a gist of getting global illumination within Unreal Engine using those two methods. For the rest of the tutorial, we're going to be sticking with lumen. So that's lighting in a nutshell within Unreal Engine 5. So I hope you enjoyed that part. And now it's on to the fun stuff, and that is the world creation portion of this tutorial. So we're going to start off with landscapes. And of course, landscapes are really important because you will always see a landscape. Most of the time in Unreal Engine, you're probably standing on top of a landscape. So let's jump into it. So let's create a landscape by first creating a new level. So I'll do that by pressing Control and Space. And let's go into my stuff, maps, and let me right click. Let's create a new level and let's call this landscape example. Press enter, and I'm just going to jump into it just like this. Let's go save selected, and we will get a completely blank world. As we can see in the world outliner, there is nothing inside of it. So I'm going to press this button right here to enter into landscape mode. Now we will see that we get a green grid, and this green grid will be the basics of our landscape. And we see that we have a bunch of options right here. So these options can be pretty complicated, and I'm going to go just use the defaults right here for now. But in case you want to change what your landscape looks like, I highly recommend you go on the Unreal Engine documentation, specifically the landscape technical guide. And at the very bottom here, they have a bunch of recommended landscape sizes. So depending on how big you want your landscape to be, I'd recommend picking one of these templates and just inputting those numbers into your new landscape right here, just like that. But for now, I'm going to keep it at default, and let's press on create. So this will create a landscape, and of course we don't see anything because we have to light our scene. So we're going to go over the basics of how I would go ahead and light an outdoor scene just like this. So I'm going to go back into place actors mode by clicking on this button right here, or if you probably noticed, I use a shortcut. So Shift F1 to go to this mode, Shift F2 for landscape, 3 for foliage, 4 for mesh painting, and so on. And don't worry, we're going to go over what the foliage tool is in just a bit. But let's go back into our place actors mode, and we're going to come up to create lights and simply drag in a directional light just like this. So I'll just bring it up. And now that we have our directional light, let's go bring in our sky. So we're going to go create visual effects, sky and atmosphere. And then we're going to go click on a directional light. Let us set it to movable, scroll all the way down, and make sure atmosphere and cloud, atmosphere sunlight is turned on. Just like that. So there we go. And now let's go add in a cube. So I'm going to go shapes, cube. We'll drag it in. And while we are getting that bounce lighting from the directional light, we're not getting the lighting from our sky. And that's because we need to add in, go to create, lights, our skylight. So just set in our skylight, set our skylight to movable, and make sure real-time capture is enabled. That's how if we move our sun down, it will also carry that. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and uncheck our grid snap, our angle snapping. And then if I hold down Control and L, I can move this sun around, and we can see that my sky dynamically changes color depending on the position of the sun. So this is absolutely amazing. And our skylight is also being updated at the same time since we have real-time capture enabled. So congratulations. This is pretty much how I would light an outdoor scene. You just lit your first outdoor scene in Unreal Engine. There's really is no other difference other than we can go into these settings of our skylight, atmosphere, and sun, and just go ahead and maybe change some settings for our own purposes. But this is what I pretty much would do. So there's one issue, and that is we would notice that, again, we are getting just a black void within our sky. This is no good. So we can fill the black void with fog. So if I come to create And then if I go to visual effects, let's add in an exponential height fog. That will just fill our black void. But then we have the issue, and that is if I lower my sun, so I'm press Control and L at the same time. If I lower my sun, our scene should be completely black right now, but our fog is lighting up our scene. And this is no good. So the way we would fix that is that we have to go into our settings and project settings. And I'm going to type up here in the search bar fog and make sure support sky atmosphere affecting height fog is turned on. Now it's going to ask you to restart your engine. You're going to have to restart and recompile a lot of your shaders. So this might take a bit, but I'm going to hit restart now. And let's save selected. Once Unreal Engine opens up again, you'll notice at the bottom right-hand corner, it says compiling shaders. This will just take a bit, so we're going to wait until it's at 100, and then we'll jump back into here and go into our landscape map. Okay, so we are done compiling shaders, so Control and Space. Let's go into our landscape example, and here we have our fog. Now you notice this didn't immediately fix the issue if I hold down Control and L at the same time. And keep in mind, you want to hold down Control that is on the right side of your keyboard, not the control on your left side, and holding down that control button and L at the same time. If I move it down, that did not fix the issue, and that's because I need to click on my height fog and come down to fog in scattering color. We'll bring this from blue all the way down to black, and then right here, I'll scroll all the way down to directional in scattering, and we'll bring this from this greenish all the way down to black. So now if I press Control and L, I can increase my sun. So like right here, right now we're at nighttime, then slowly the sun starts to come up, and now it turned to daytime. And our fog is working great, and it's not giving us any annoying emissive values while it's nighttime. So that's how you would go ahead and fix the fog, making it compatible for your sky and atmosphere. So before we start working on our landscape, I think now is a good time before I even start working on an environment, and that is to get in a human reference. That's how I understand the scale at which I'm working. So to bring in a human reference, you want to press Control and Space, and then click on Add. And we want to specifically go to Add Features or Content Pack at the very top here. And then we want to select on third person, and that's how we could get in this mannequin character, and select Add to Project. So this will just add the third person template to our project automatically. And then if we go into mannequin, let's go to character, mesh, and we can drag out sk_mannequin, and we can drag out sk_mannequin female. And now we have some human references to give us some scale for the environment we are going to create. Now, keep in mind that this human is about, I believe, is 183 centimeters tall, and that's around 6 feet tall. So that's the average human height. And the female is around, I think, 175 centimeters tall, which is the average female height. Okay, so for these tabs right here, I think I'm going to right click and let's go to move to sidebar. Same thing with these two. So right click, move to sidebar, right click, move to sidebar. Now, if we zoom out, I can press Shift and 2 and we will jump into our landscape mode, or I could come up here and click that button. So Shift and 2 is your landscape mode. Landscape mode is pretty nice, and you'll notice that by default, we're in sculpt. We want to go from manage to sculpt, so make sure you're in sculpt right now. And we get a brush. If I place my brush anywhere down, we will notice that we immediately start sculpting our landscape. So sculpt brush, it will just increase that height. And then if we press shift, that will go in the opposite direction. So I'm going to come up to show. Let's go and hide my grid right now since I don't want that. And now, so holding down the left mouse button will increase my height. Holding down shift will decrease it. And we get some tool strength. So if I bring it up to 1, this is really powerful. If I bring down to, let's go 0.1, it's a very light touch. Also, we could change our brush fall off. So right now it's a 0.5. If we bring this to 1, then we get a very harsh brush. And if we bring this all the way up to 1, we get a very soft brush. Also, we can change our brush size. So right now it's at 2048. We can make this insanely big, or we can make this really small. So you can always press on this button right here to bring everything back to its default values. Next up, we have the smooth brush. The smooth brush does exactly what you would expect. We can just start holding down our left mouse button and we can start to paint away. We can start to smooth our landscape. Also, it's important to know that you can change your brush size by using the bracket keys. So left bracket will make our brush size go down, and right bracket will increase our brush size. Exactly in Photoshop if you've ever used it. So this is pretty fun. You can come through, you can sculpt, and then you can smooth out your scene. You can also use the Flatten Brush. So the Flatten Brush is pretty good because let's say if you have some gameplay elements and your landscape needs to be completely flat, especially up here, then you just come in with a Flatten Brush. You can decrease the size and you can make a flat play area for your gameplay elements. So that's pretty nice. So these three, sculpt, smooth, and flatten, are probably the brushes that are used the most. The other brushes we will not be going over right now because those are for very specific case scenarios. Also, it's important to know that right now the workflow for creating landscapes in Unreal Engine, normally we don't create the landscape or we don't manually go through and sculpt the landscape within Unreal Engine. Instead, we will use a very specific program like Gaia or World Machine that specializes in generating landscapes and take that landscape and import it into Unreal Engine as a height map. So as of now, generally, we create landscapes within other programs. Now, this is slowly starting to change. This is really powerful. If I bring everything back to its default values. Next up, we have the smooth brush. The smooth brush does exactly what you would expect. We can just start holding down our left mouse button and we can start to paint away. We can start to smooth our landscape. Also, it's important to know that you can change your brush size by using the bracket keys. So left bracket will make our brush size go down, and right bracket will increase our brush size. Exactly in Photoshop if you've ever used it. So this is pretty fun. You can come through, you can sculpt, and then you can smooth out your scene. You can also use the Flatten Brush. So the Flatten Brush is pretty good because let's say if you have some gameplay elements and your landscape needs to be completely flat, especially up here, then you just come in with a Flatten Brush. You can decrease the size and you can make a flat play area for your gameplay elements. So that's pretty nice. So these three, sculpt, smooth, and flatten, are probably the brushes that are used the most. The other brushes we will not be going over right now because those are for very specific case scenarios. Also, it's important to know that right now the workflow for creating landscapes in Unreal Engine, normally we don't create the landscape or we don't manually go through and sculpt the landscape within Unreal Engine. Instead, we will use a very specific program like Gaia or World Machine that specializes in generating landscapes and take that landscape and import it into Unreal Engine as a height map. So as of now, generally, we create landscapes within other programs. Now, this is slowly starting to change. Unreal Engine has been adding in a lot of new landscaping features that are great, and slowly and surely these landscape features will eventually replace those programs. And you can play with those landscape features by coming up to Settings, Plugins, and it's specifically called Landmass. So you can enable this and you can play with some of the features. We won't be enabling that right now since it's in beta and it is just really complicated. We will save that for another tutorial since after all, this is a beginner tutorial series. Now let's jump into how we can actually add a landscape material to our landscape. So let's go back into our select actors mode by pressing Shift and 1 at the same time. Now, if we select our landscape and then if we go into the details panel, we'll scroll all the way down here and we can see that under landscape, we have landscape material. So we can't just drag a landscape material onto our landscape. We have to actually drag it into this little slot right here. And landscape materials are a little bit different from normal materials. So let's actually create our first landscape material by coming into my stuff, materials, and let's right click. Let's create a new material and I'm going to call this M_my landscape. Just like that, and let's Control S and open it up. So the big difference between a landscape material and a normal material is that the landscape material will have, if I right click, we have landscape layer blend. And if I select it right here, this will basically tell Unreal that this entire material is a landscape layer. And if I come in here and if I press the plus button, we can add different layers. So we can have several different layers. Let's say we have a grass layer, a stone layer, a dirt layer, and then we're able to paint those layers within the landscape mode. So that's why we have layers. So let's create 2 layers right now. Let's call this one, if I have the drop down, let's call this one grass. And then let's add in another layer, and let's call this one right here. Let's Control S and open it up. So the big difference between a landscape material and a normal material is right now, since it's in beta, and materials are a little bit different from normal materials. So let's actually create our first landscape material by coming into my stuff, materials, and let's right click, let's create a new material, and I'm going to call this M_my landscape. Just like that, and let's Control S and open it up. So the big difference between a landscape material and a normal material is that the landscape material will have, if I right click, we have landscape layer blend. And if I select it right here, this will basically tell Unreal that this entire material is a landscape layer. And if I come into here and if I press the plus button, we can add different layers. So we can have several right here. This will basically, and let's material is that the landscape material will have, if I right click, we have landscape layer blend. And if I select it right here, this will basically tell Unreal that this entire material is a landscape layer. And if I come into here and if I press the plus button, we can add different layers. So we can have several different layers. Let's say we have a grass layer, a stone layer, a dirt layer, and then we're able to paint those layers within the landscape mode. So that's why we have layers. So let's create 2 layers right now. Let's call this one, if I have the drop down, let's call this one grass. And then let's add in another layer, and let's call this one right here dirt. Just like this. So essentially what we're going to do is that we're going to blend in between 2 different texture sets. A texture set for grass and then a texture set for dirt. And we can do that if I press Control and space. Let's go grab some textures from the starter content. And then let's go into textures. And for the grass, let's drag in this grass right here. And this normal map. And then for the dirt, we're just going to use, I believe we're just going to use Rust for now. So we're just going to select Rust right there and like this. And also drag these 2 in. So just like that. So it looks like these textures don't have a roughness map, but that's fine. We could just use a constant value for the roughness right now. So for this, we're going to drag in grass like this, and then we'll put our dirt right there and drag in our dirt into the layer blend. Now I'm going to have to select this and press Control and W to duplicate this layer blend. Now we're going to go switch in between the layer for the grass and then for the dirt, specifically for the normal map. So we'll plug up the normal map right here, and then we will plug in the color right here, just like that. And for the roughness, I'm going to hold down 1 and left click to bring in a constant scalar value. And let's bring this roughness from 0 to 1 to make our material completely rough. And then I'll hook it up to roughness just like this. And now I will press apply, save. And now we made our first landscape material. So if I go back into landscape example, we can't just, let's go back into where that landscape material is located. So a shortcut, instead of having to navigate through my content drawer and find where my landscape material is located, I could come up to M_my landscape and click on the browse icon. That will just jump to the location within my content drawer of this specific material. So now if I come back into my level, I can press Control space and I already have my landscape material selected for me. So I can drag this into my scene and nothing will happen. And that's because I need to specifically, if I right click on details, let's restore this tab. I need to drag this into the landscape material slot right there, just like this. And now we will notice that our landscape looks immensely glitching. We see we get a bunch of weird shading issues. And this is on purpose. This is because we need to assign a landscape layer to our landscape. So to do so, we need to jump into our landscape modes and make sure we go into the paint tab right here. So in landscape mode, paint tab, you want to come all the way down here and you will see that we have different layers. These are the layers that we assigned within our landscape materials. So we see that we created a grass and dirt layer, and within here we have grass and dirt respectively. So I'm going to click on the plus icon to create a layer, and then I want to click on weight blended layer normal, just like this. And we can see that it's going to create a landscape layer for us, and it's going to automatically create a folder called landscape example _ shared assets. That's fine. And the name is going to be grass _ layer info. That's also fine. So now I'm going to press save. And we can see that we just created that layer. It's saved right here automatically. Let's press Control and S to make sure it's saved. And down here, we can see we have our grass. And also, I can add another layer. So let's add in the dirt layer by using the same process. So I'll click on the plus icon, weight blend layer normal. Let's save it. And let's click on dirt right here. And if I lower my brush size, I can start painting in dirt just like this. So take a bit to compile, and we won't be seeing anything right now. And that's because we need to bring up the tool strength from 0.128 all the way up to 1. And now we can start seeing that we're painting in that dirt layer into our landscape just like this. So that's the process of creating landscape materials. So if we jump into our landscape material, let's go ahead and let's edit the actual size of our landscape. So to do so, we're going to do the same exact thing that we did back in the material section of this tutorial. And that is we're going to create a coordinate, texture coordinate, and we'll drag from here, and let's use M. And then I'm going to hold down 1. Let's create a constant scalar parameter, right click, convert to parameter, and let's call this grass scale. And let's make this 1 by default. And we're going to plug this into my grass textures, just like that. And I'm going to go highlight both of these and press Control and W to duplicate them. And then I'm going to name this one from grass scale to, let's call it dirt scale. Just like that. And we're going to drag from texture coordinate and put this one into our dirt and the dirt right below it, just like this. So I'm going to press apply. And now we will notice within here, let's go and create a material instance of this material. So with my land, its parameters. So now if I open up my landscape material instance that we just made, we can see that we have those 2 parameters. So I'll just undock this from the tab. And now we can see that I can increase my grass scale, or I can decrease it to like 0.5 to make my grass bigger. And I could come to the dirt. Let's say this dirt is tiling a bunch. I could come here and make this, let's go 0.5, just like this. So it's important to know that we can increase the size of our landscape by coming up here into the landscape modes or pressing Shift 2 and coming to manage and then selecting the add tool. And now we can add even more components to our landscape and increase the size of our landscape after creating it. Also, if we go into our landscape material, so let's jump back into here. So you'll notice that right now all we have are 2 texture sets. We have color and then we have our normal map. And right now this is fine, but imagine if we had a roughness texture. Then we would have to duplicate layer blend again and then plug up the roughness into our layer blend. And that can just be a complete hassle. So one thing I prefer to do, so instead of setting up my landscape layers like this, is that I like to use material attributes. So I'm going to go and let us delete this bottom one right here. And I'm going to hold down Alt and we're going to break the connections just like this. And I think I will go separate them out. That's how the top is grass and the bottom is dirt. So I'm just highlight both of these and let's bring it down just like this. And then let's make the texture coordinate go further back and let's bring it like this. So instead of individually blending between each of these different channels, I'm going to just blend between the material as a whole. And we could do that if I hold down Alt and let's break it. Make sure I select somewhere empty. So that's how we have the details panel of our material as a whole. And down here, I want to click on Use Material Attributes. So now if I drag from here, I can go Make Material Attribute. And instead of making the material within the actual material attribute, we can make a material after the fact. And this is what we're going to use. We're going to make 2 materials and then blend between the 2 materials. So this one material will have a bunch of sub-materials within them. So of course, I want to hook up color to base color and normal to our normal, just like this. And let's make our roughness 1 or complete rough right there. And then down here, let's do the exact same thing. So I'm going to go highlight the 1. Let's go Control W. And then we're going to plug in 1 right here to roughness, color to color, and normal to normal, just like this. So we have one material and then we have another material. So now we can blend it just like this. So we're blending different material attributes instead of a single channel. And then the output will go into my output just like that. And it's important to know that I can highlight something and I can press the C key to comment this. So I'll press C and I'm just going to call this grass material. And below here, let's go highlight this again and let's go C and let's call this dirt material. Just like that. So commenting is pretty good if you want to organize your graph. That's how you know exactly what is happening. So essentially what we did was that we decided to create two different materials within one material, and then we are blending those materials with the layer blend, and we are outputting that material as a material attributes. And again, we can switch in between different outputs by coming down here into the details panel and selecting use material attributes on and off, and selecting it just like that. So I'll press apply and we won't notice any change. Our scene looks exactly the same. So this is personally how I like to make my landscape layer materials, by neatly organizing them into a bunch of sub-materials. So that's the very basics of how to make landscapes in Unreal Engine 5. And if you've been following this channel for a while, you know that you can really get complicated with landscapes, which is why I have an entire tutorial series you can check out on how to create really good landscapes within Unreal Engine. And I also have a free landscape master material that will be updated to Unreal Engine 5. So stay tuned for that. So we're not going to keep on talking about landscape right now because we have a bunch of other topics to go over, and specifically Megascans. Megascans is a free library of thousands of free assets created by Epic Games for us to use. So let's go over how we can enable that within Unreal Engine 5. So before we move on to Megascans, I don't really like this material, so I think I'll just remove it from my landscape from now by clicking on the landscape. And within the details panel, let's click on this arrow to reset it back to the default landscape. So I'll just leave it at here for now. I think another thing I'll do is let's go lock our exposure value by coming up to create, visual effects, post-process volume, drag it in. And of course, we've already done this a bunch of times. We scroll all the way down here, make sure infinite extent unbound is checked to true. That's how it affects my entire world. And come back up here to exposure. And we're going to change this to manual. And we'll just bring it up. Let's make this around 11 for now. Okay, great. So unlike previous Unreal Engine versions, Unreal Engine 5 already has Megascans built in. So we don't have to download a separate program to be able to get those Megascan assets. So to do that, first I'm going to right click. Let's go move this to sidebar. And to get up the Megascans window, all you have to do is press Control and space to bring up your content drawer. And within add, we'll see up here we have add Quixel content. So we can just select that right there and a new window will pop up. It might ask you to sign in, so you can just sign in to your Epic Games account, the same Epic Games account you are using to use Unreal Engine 5. And now we have access to, we can see right there, 15,242 free assets that we can use for Unreal Engine. And a lot of people wonder, can I use this for games and movies? Yes, you can. What matters is that you need to keep everything within Unreal Engine. So you can't just download these and then use them in 3ds Max or Unity. Now, let's go and download an object. And let's say I want to add in this rock to my world. All you have to do is merely just drag it into your world just like that. And it will start to spawn in and it will start to download. And as it is downloading, we can move this rock around, place it in our level, which is a great feature because if we're downloading a really large asset, we can still use that asset before it's finished downloading. Now that our asset is done downloading, if we open up our content drawer, we can see that we get a bunch of new folders. And specifically, we get the Megascans folder and the MS Presets folder. So the Megascans folder will contain all the different Megascans we download from Bridge. So all your materials, decals, and meshes will go into this folder. And right below that, we have Megascans Preset folder. So this contains all the different master materials that Megascans will use. For example, I believe the default master material is just ms_default material. If we double click on this and double click right here, we can see that this is the material that our rock is currently using. And we could go through here and see how they created that material. So I'm going to go exit out of this. And let's say I want to jump to where this asset is located within my content browser. Instead of having to go through and try to find where this asset is, I can press Control and B at the same time, and that will just jump to that asset's location. So for example, if I want to go to where the mannequin is stored, I can just select it and press Control and B at the same time, and it will jump to that location and highlight it for us. So that's a neat shortcut. I use that shortcut all the time, and that's just Control B. So with Control B, we can get my static mesh, and to the left of it is our material instance. Let's go open it up and see what parameters we have available for us to play with. So here is our material instance, and I'm going to go undock the details panel. That's so I can go through all of these details and see what Megascans allows us to change by default. So first off, we have Albedo Tint. This is very self-explanatory. This is just the tint of a rock. So let's say if you want to give it kind of like a bluish feel to it, you could just come right here and change the color just a little bit more to blue. And if you don't like that, you can set all the values to 1 to reset that back to white. And right below that, we have Albedo Controls. So Albedo Controls are special because we can increase our saturation, we can decrease our brightness. Let's say if our rock is a little bit too bright right now, we could bring that to 0.5. Or we can increase the contrast. So instead of 1, we can make this 2 and really increase that contrast. So I'll set that at 1 right now. So I use Albedo Controls and Albedo Tint probably the most out of all these parameters. And then if we scroll down, we see that we also have controls for metallic. I'm not going to be playing with those right now because for our rock, it doesn't have any metallic values. And for the majority of Megascans assets, they don't use metallic that often. And finally, we have Specular. One thing I like to do for all my natural assets, such as rocks, cliffs, dirt, landscapes, is I like to increase the specular value. Since right now, I feel like this rock is a little bit too shiny. So if I come to specular from Albedo Override, make that true, and let's change it from 0 to 1. We get rid of a lot of that shininess to the rock, which was feeling unnatural. So this was before. So this is default specular, and this is specular override. So for rocks, cliffs, I'm just going to keep my specular albedo override at 1. And then, of course, we could play with the roughness and the normal strength. So I can increase that normal strength to 2, or I can bring that normal strength down to 0 and have it be no normal. So I'll just leave that at 1 for now. That was a really quick overview of all the different parameters this rock has to offer. And I feel like the parameters that Megascans has by default are good enough and pretty much get the job almost all the time. Again, if you really need to edit this material, you could come down here and then open the parent of this material instance, which was the material we were just in right here. And then you can make your own edits. But that's pretty advanced. This is important now. Let's say if we exit out of the details panel, and then if we open up this rock's material instance right here, you might be worried since we don't have our details panel anymore. We can't play with those parameters. Don't worry. Of course, we could come up to window, and then we could add the details back just like that. And I'll dock it right there again. So let's save and exit out. Also, it's important to know that we don't have to drag our Megascan assets into our world in order to get those assets. You could, so I'll come with the content, and you can also open up Quixel Bridge right here. You could come in here, and let's say for this material, we could click on it, and then simply click on download. So that will download the material for us. And once it is done downloading, all we have to do is press on the add button. And if we press Control and space, we will notice that within Megascans, we get a new material instance right here. That was our material under a new folder that was created called Surfaces. So this is the asset we just downloaded. So you don't have to drag your asset into your world. You could just manually download it and add it through Quixel Bridge. Okay, so now it's time to go over Foliage. And of course, Unreal Engine has some of the best foliage that is located within our Megascans library. So let's open up Bridge once again. And within Bridge, let's decide on a foliage that we're going to use just for demonstration purposes. I believe I'm just going to look up Fern. And let's use this Fern right here. So we could choose a quality. I'm just going to make sure that this is high quality. And we can either drag this out into my scene or press download. I think I'll just press download. Now that it is done downloading, all I have to do is press on add. And this will add it into my content browser. So if I press Control and space, we can see that we have a new folder called 3D Plants. And underneath 3D Plants, we have a bunch of different foliage. And if I just drag in my little fern right there, we can see that our fern already has, by default, some nice subsurface scattering. So our foliage is feeling oddly stale right now, and that's because it's not moving in the wind. Foliage isn't just still like this. Sometimes it's swaying back and forth because the wind is pushing on it. So let's activate wind right now. If we go into our material instance, we'll see that we have a lot of material instances that are similar to our rock material right there. But if we scroll all the way down, we have a new setting, and that is enable grass wind. So I'll just click it. Let's make sure we enable it. And now I'm going to go exit out of my material instance. We get some nice grass wind that is moving our fern back and forth as if this world actually has wind inside of it. Now we could just simply drag out our fern, copy it again, rotate it, scale it, and create an entire world that way. But that is way too slow. So instead, what I'm going to do is let's delete these ferns and go into my foliage mode. Up here, it's a little grass icon, or I can press Shift and 3 as a shortcut. And we'll see that we have our foliage right there, ready to go, ready to be painted in. So normally if we're creating foliage and we're importing it ourselves, not through Megascans, you wouldn't see these objects here ready to be painted with. So if you don't see your objects here, you want to press Control and Space, and you want to find out where your static mesh is, where your object is, and simply select all your foliage by selecting one, holding down Shift to select them all, and then drag it into this location right there, just like that. But I'm not going to because Unreal is smart, especially with Megascans, to know that this is foliage, and I want it to already be within my foliage tool, ready to start painting with. So right now, if we try to paint, we'll notice that we don't get any brush. Well, that's because we need to tell Unreal which one of these meshes we want to paint with. So I'll just select the first one right now, and we still can't paint. That's because in the top left-hand corner, we need to make sure that the checkbox is checked on. So now if I place it down, we can see that I'm painting just like that. And we have our nice little foliage, and we can make a forest, a grassy field that way. So if I come all the way over here, and this is pretty important, we can increase the paint density, which will increase the density. So that was a density of 0.5. And now this is a density all the way up to 1. We can even increase that density more down here. So each of these objects have some settings we can play with right here. So right now this density is at 100. If we increase this to, let's say, 500, and then if I'm just going to lower my brush size. And remember, we can lower and increase my brush size right here at brush size, or we can use the bracket keys, just like the landscaping tool. And now if I left click, we can see that we get a lot denser location. So we can play with our density down here for individual objects, and we could play with our density as a whole up here for my brush. So I'll bring this back down to 0.5. And let me go click on the first one, and let's change this back from 500 to 100. So if you want to delete objects, you want to make sure that the object you want to delete is selected right there. And then we're going to hold down Shift and simply erase them like that. So remember, Unreal Engine 5 is an alpha. I'm surprised we haven't run into that many bugs so far, but I'm guessing this is a bug we're going to have to contend with right now. By the time you're watching this, you probably won't see that bug. So if is a bug we're going to have to contend with right now. So remember on the first one, and let's change this back from 500 to 100. So if you want to delete objects, you want to make sure that the object you want to delete is selected right there. And then we're going to hold down Shift and simply erase them like that. So remember, Unreal Engine 5 is an alpha. I'm surprised we haven't run into that many bugs so far, but I'm guessing this is a bug we're going to have to contend with right now. By the time you're watching this, you probably won't see that bug. So if we want to play with the size, because right now all this, it's a set size right now. Foliage is never just a set size. We have varying size. We have small ferns and big ferns. We can come into here, and with this object selected, we can do Scale X and make sure scaling is set to uniform. We can scale this with varying degrees. So let's say we can maybe go from 0.5 to 2. And now if I paint it down, we will see that my ferns, we see that we have small ferns and big ferns. So that's a way to vary the scale. And of course, we can check multiple objects to paint multiple ones. So I'll just set this back to 1. And now I could go through each one and check each box. Or I could select one, hold down Shift to select a bunch of them, and then check the box just like that. So that's a little shortcut. If we select multiple ones holding down Shift, we can check and uncheck them. So now with all my objects activated, if I place them down, we can see that we are painting all of our fern, just like this. And if we really want to, we can edit individual ferns. So let's say if I don't like the position of this one fern right here, I could come up to select and then select that individual fern and move it around like this. So you're not just limited to the paint tool, you can also select different foliage actors and move them around your world. And it's important to know that if I go back into paint, by default, if we, let's say, some foliage right here, that foliage will be painted on top of our object, on top of our static mesh. If you don't want our foliage to be set to a static mesh, and even if I press Shift F1 to go into select actors, and if I move this around, our foliage will follow it. If we don't want that to happen, we can go to Shift 3 to go back into my foliage mode, and I can uncheck static mesh. So now, if I hold down Shift, and let me check static mesh real quickly, and let's delete all the foliage right there. And then if I uncheck static mesh and I try to paint, we will notice that we are no longer painting on top of that static mesh. So that's how you paint foliage within Unreal Engine. Now we're going to talk about Nanite. So Unreal Engine 5 is a big deal because of two things, Lumen and Nanite. Now we've already gone over Lumen, but we haven't gone over Nanite. So you can think of Nanite as virtualized geometry. It's a new way to look at static meshes that allows for way more polygons than has ever been possible in real time. So we can have movie quality assets running in real time in Unreal Engine 5. So let's jump into Unreal Engine and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So right now I have opened the Epic Games sample project. You can download this sample project within the Epic Games launcher. Under the UE5 tab, you just want to scroll all the way down and you could download it right there. Keep in mind, it is 100 gigabytes large. So if we zoom up right here, we can see that this is an entire large desert. And we can visualize what Nanite is doing right now by coming up to Lit, Nanite Visualization, and clicking on triangles. So every color you see right here is an individual triangle, is an individual polygon. So this is really close to one polygon or one triangle per pixel. And to see that in a game engine running in real time is absolutely amazing. And we can see that when I zoom in on any specific asset, our polygons get denser and denser and denser, and that's where the dynamic factor comes in. So far away, it won't be rendering as many triangles as it could, but then if you get closer and closer to an asset, then those triangles start to come in. So let's go get out of Nanite. And there's just one downside right now, and that is Nanite only works for static meshes. So this is great for your rocks and your cliffs, but it doesn't really work for anything else, which is why Epic Games decided to show off Nanite with a desert. And that's because a desert is pretty much only comprised of rocks and cliffs. Also, this is really interesting to know, is that they're not using any landscape. Everything you see here are just static meshes, even down here. If we start clicking around, we can see that all of these, especially right here, we can increase this. All of these are just individual static meshes. So now let's jump back into our original project and see how we can activate nanites. So to activate nanite on a static mesh, it is very simple. All we need to do is open up a static mesh. So I'm going to select it right now and press Control and E as a shortcut to open up the static mesh. And then you'll see right under material slots, we'll have nanite settings, and we will switch it from not enabled to enabled. Just like that. And we're going to press Apply Changes. And now we have a nanite mesh. It is literally that easy, and we can tell that it's a nanite mesh by coming up to Lit, going down to Buffer Visualization, Nanite Visualization, and clicking on Triangle. So we can see it's right there. Now, so if we zoom far away, those triangles will start to decrease and change. So keep in mind that this mesh wasn't really that dense to begin with, but this will be very helpful for meshes that are really, really dense, or it would still be helpful for meshes that aren't dense. Especially if we copy a bunch of these around, since it is nanite, it will still be a lot more performant if they weren't nanite. And there's another way that we can activate nanite, and that is if I press Control and B to find out where the static mesh is within my content browser. All you have to do is right click on your static mesh, and up here we have nanite, and you can enable it, disable it also right here. So we don't even have to open up the static mesh to enable nanites. So let's go import some nanite meshes. And luckily, Unreal Engine already triangle, so we can see it's right there. Find out where the static mesh is within my content browser. all you have to do is right click on your static mesh. And up here we have Nanite, and you can enable it, disable it also right here. So we don't even have to open up the static mesh to enable nanites. So let's go import some nanite meshes. And luckily, Unreal Engine already comes with a bunch of nanite meshes from, of course, Quixel Bridge. So we're going to open up Quixel Bridge. And if we scroll down, we will notice that, let me find a nice rock formation, like this one right here. That under quality, we could change it from high quality to nanite. So this will be the most amount of quality possible. And then we can simply press download. Now that we have that downloaded, and keep in mind that might take a while since this is a very high poly mesh, I'm going to click on add. And now if I press Control and space, we see under 3D assets, we have this massive Nordic coastal cliff. And if I drag it into my scene, it might take a little while. And it looks like we're inside it, so I'll just zoom out. And here we have just an absolute massive static mesh. And if we go into lit, Nanite Visualization, triangles, and it looks like that there's a glitch where Nanite wasn't activated on this mesh. If I go into Alt-2, we can see that Nanite hasn't been activated. If Nanite is activated, then we won't see this mesh. Instead, we would see that it's kind of darker right there. Nanite doesn't work for wireframe view mode right now, but no problem. We can activate this by pressing Control-B, right-clicking, Nanite, and enable. And we go back to lit. Now, if we go into Nanite Visualization, triangles, we can see that we have a Nanite mesh in here. And this is just an absolutely massive mesh, really dense, especially if we come up to it like this. And scrolling all the way out, we can see those triangles slowly start to get bigger with that dynamic resolution. So this is absolutely amazing. We could copy thousands of these assets around my level, and it would just be very performant. We wouldn't notice that much of a performance dip. So that was a brief introduction to Nanite. So now it's time to start programming in Unreal Engine 5. And in case you forgot, Unreal Engine 5 is a video game engine. So of course, programming will be a pretty big part of it. So Unreal Engine 5 handles programming a little bit different from other video game engines. Instead of having lines of code, we have blocks of nodes that we can put together and create really complicated programming that way. And these blocks of nodes is called Blueprint, which is Unreal Engine's visual scripting language. So in my opinion, Blueprint is a lot more intuitive than traditional coding because it's a lot easier for a beginner to get their mind around it. So even if you don't plan on programming games or just programming in general, I highly, highly recommend you still know the fundamentals of Blueprint because blueprints are connected everywhere within Unreal Engine. Eventually, you're going to come across blueprints. So it is an essential skill to learn if you're ever going to be using Unreal Engine 5. And keep in mind, we still have our traditional C++ coding that you could do. But for our purposes, we're just going to start off with Blueprint for this tutorial. So before we can begin to create our small game, we first need to import the third-person character content. Now, if you've been following along with this tutorial, we've already imported the third-person character content right here. If we press Control and space, you can tell we did because all the way down here, we have a folder called third-person blueprint. And within here, we get the third-person character, which is the character we're going to be using, and the game mode. If you haven't imported this content in, you can come into add feature or content pack, and then select third-person character and click on add to project. So once you have this character in, if we press play, we'll notice nothing happened. We're actually playing in game right now. You can exit this by pressing escape to exit out. So you can play a game by pressing play, and then you can stop playing the game by simply pressing escape. So we need to tell Unreal Engine that we want to use this third-person character, specifically this blueprint right here, as our starting point for our game. So to do so, we need to click on World Settings. So again, World Settings are the settings of my entire world. If you don't see the World Settings window, you need to come up to Windows and select World Settings right there. And actually, I'm going to right-click here and restore all my tabs. That's how I will always see them in my game. Now, within World Settings, within the drop-down, we want to select this game mode right here, because this game mode will tell Unreal Engine that I want to use the third-person character. And in case you can't see, if I go to Settings, Thumbnail Size, Large, the third-person character is just that character right there, and we'll be able to move around within it. So I can drag my game mode right here, just like this, and let go. So now if I press play, we can see we get a third-person character. If I use WASD keys, I can move around, and the spacebar to jump. So just a really simple template. If I press escape, we stop playing the game just like that. So let's open up that character. If I press Control and space, we see that the third person character is in the folder, third person blueprint, and in blueprints. So double clicking on this will show us the blueprints. So I'm gonna go dock this up here just like this. And then I'm gonna select the viewport right here. And we can see all the components that make up this blueprint. So the control of this blueprint is exactly the same as it is within our level. We can move around, holding down the right mouse button, and if we press F, we can focus to an object, and holding down Alt and the left mouse button, we can rotate around it and use the right mouse button to zoom in and out just like this. So the exact same controls, and we'll notice in the top left-hand corner right here, we have a components tab. These are all the different objects that make up my current blueprint. You could think of this as pretty much the world outliner, but for our small little blueprint. Right below that, we have all the different variables and events that make up my blueprints. And don't worry, we'll go over what those are in just a bit. And to the right, all the way right here, we have the details panel. It works just like the details panel in my world. I can select something, and then I'll get some properties that I can change within the details panel. So you notice I just selected my skeletal mesh, my character in the middle right here, and we can even change the skeletal mesh. So let's say if you don't want to use the default mannequin, you can click on this drop down and then select sk_mannequin female. And now if we press play, we can play also. We don't have to press play when we're in the level editor. We can press play right here. And now our character is falling down into the abyss, and that's because we don't have a player start location. So let's come up to create, and then we're going to come down to player start, and I'm going to drag it right here. And now if I press play, we will spawn at that location. So if we come back into third person character, pressing play, we'll just start off right here, and you will notice that now we are the female mannequin. So that is where you would change it, but I'm just going to change it back into the default mannequin for now. So if we click on the event graph, we can see all the different blueprints, all the different nodes, the programming that makes up my character. So everything you see right here, such as the walking, the camera movement, the jumping, that's all being handled right here. We won't explain what all these different blueprints and nodes are doing right now, because then that will add another hour to this beginner course, and this beginner course is already very long as is. Don't worry, we'll go over what all these nodes are doing in a different videos. So the controls are exactly like your material graph. You hold on the right mouse button, you can pan around, and you can use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out, just like this. Also, this is pretty important. Let's say you ever accidentally close your event graph. Now, do not worry, you could get back that event graph by coming to the left here and selecting event graph right there and double clicking. So that's how you would open it up again. So all these red nodes right here, these are event nodes. These nodes will basically fire out whenever something is happening. For example, right here is jump. And right now, jump is linked to our spacebar. Whenever we press jump, then this node right here will fire out. And then any nodes in sequence will be activated. So when we press the spacebar, then it's going to tell our character to go ahead and jump. And then when we let go of the spacebar, it's going to tell our character to stop jumping. So right here, this logic is literally just, so this run, whenever we press the spacebar, we jump, then our character will jump. And real quickly, I'm going to press Shift and F1 at the same time, and this will bring back my mouse cursor. Now up here, I'm going to select my third person character, and then we're going to go ahead and open up this window once again, and I'll drag it right here. That's so we can see what's happening. And now we can actually see the nodes that are firing and what's being activated. So if I press the spacebar, boom, we can see that our spacebar is jumping. So it's jumping, then let go, and it stops jumping. So that's a good visual representation of the actual programming that is happening right now. So let's create our own event. If we come down here, I can right click, and right clicking will give me a list of all the different nodes that I can use right now. So I want a specific one, and that is keyboard and then F. So this is an event, and this event will run whenever I press the F key. And to show that this event is running, I'm going to drag when pressed, and now I'm going to type in print string. And we're just going to leave it at hello for now. You could change this. Actually, I'll just change it to F is pressed. Exclamation point. So now when I press play, and whenever I press F, we can see that on the top left-hand corner, F is pressed, is being shown. So that's how I know right now that my event is firing and everything is working fine. Just like that. So now all the nodes that are connected within the sequence will be ran whenever I press F on my keyboard. So now let's actually give our mannequin some logic when we press F. So I'm going to delete this print stream right now since we know F is working, and I'll drag from here, and I'm going to type in set collision enabled. And I specifically want to make sure I select mesh. So in case you don't know what this mesh is, it's getting a reference to this character, which if we look at the left-hand corner, it's called mesh. So another way to do this is I could have dragged out mesh from my components tab right there and let go like that. And then it's the same thing. So I'll just delete right there and like that. When we press F, we're going to tell the mesh, so our character right there, to set collisions enabled to, let's go, query and physics. Now, do not worry about the exact specifics about what is happening right now. We're just trying to go over the basics of how to navigate and create blueprints. Now, I'm going to drag from here and let's go set simulate physics. Mesh, just like that. And I want to make sure simulate physics is enabled. And then from here, I'll drag from here and go set physics blend weight mesh, just like this. And then I'm going to make the blend weight to 1. Essentially, what I'm doing is that I'm telling Unreal Engine to allow collision on my character, and then we're going to tell Unreal that I want to start simulating the physics on my character, and then I'm telling Unreal to use the bones of that character when I'm simulating my physics. So maybe you can guess right now, but these 3 nodes are going to create a ragdoll effect onto my character, just like from GTA or any other video game. So if I press play, and now if I press F, my character drops just like that. So you can have fun with this. For example, I could jump around, and then I could jump over to that block right there, and mid-jump, I could press F, and he just flies, and his physics is flying all over the place. So that is really fun. Also, we can kind of organize our nodes right here by dragging from mesh, since these 3 meshes right here, they're the same reference to this mesh right there. So I could delete these 2 and simply drag from this like that. And if I double click just like this, we can add a reroute node. And this is just really good for organizing. So again, you could hover over any wire, and then you could double click to add a reroute node just to better organize your graphs. And then I'll drag from the reroute node into set physics blend weight, double click, and move it down just like that. And now our graph is looking even nicer. So this is pretty fun. Okay, so let's create a little obstacle course for our character. So let's come back into landscape, and I'll just fly back up because I was in the middle. I was below my scene right there. And let's come over here and let's start off right here. So I'm going to go into my landscape mode with Shift 2. And then within Sculpt, I'm going to slowly increase this just like that. And let me increase the height. And then I'm going to use the Flatten tool to just flatten out an area. That will be the play area. So right here will be the play area. And I'm going to go ahead and let us move my player start. Actually, I'll just delete the player start. Come up here. Let's go create player start and drag it in just like that. So now when we press play, we spawn right here. I want it where the player has to walk all the way over there and he has to avoid different obstacles until at the very end, he will get a reward and the game will be over. So this will be the quickest and worst game ever designed in history, but it will get the point across of what blueprints is. So let's actually create an obstacle blueprint by going Control and space. And I'll just create it in third-person VP blueprints, and I'll right-click, go blueprint class. And we're going to create an actor. If you read right here, an actor is an object that can be placed or spawned in the world, which is exactly what we want. And then I'm going to call this BP underscore obstacle. So normally, this is just a convention. You don't have to name it BP underscore, but I tend to name all my blueprints started off with a BP underscore, and that's just a general convention that most people use. So now, as we can see, this is an empty blueprint and nothing is inside of it. So I want this obstacle to specifically be, if I come up to add right here, a cylinder. So we will add in a cylinder, and this cylinder is too thick, so I'm just going to stretch it out like this. And I'm going to go scale it within the X and Y axis and also move this up just like this. And let's make this a little bit skinnier. So now if I compile, save, if I come into my world, I'll press Control and Space, and I'll drag this out just like this. And now we can see that our blueprint is within our world. Also, keep in mind that whenever we do make a change, you should press compile in order to actually see that change. But whenever you press play, all the blueprints will be compiled automatically. So what I want to happen is that when I press play and when my character touches this obstacle, then my character drops dead and he plays that functionality we just created within the third person character. So to do that, we need to go in a third person character and we need to turn this into an event. Not only when we press F will our character start to ragdoll, but also if we right click, go custom event, and then we're going to call this death. So if I plug it into this, now we can call death from other blueprints. So I'm going to go into BP underscore obstacle and let's add in a collision. So that's how whenever my character touches this pole, a collision will handle some logic, and then that collision will call death within our third person character. So we need to come to add and let's type in collision, and we're going to use a capsule collision. So I want this collision to just be a little bit bigger than this obstacle. So I think I'll go decrease it just a bit, and we can increase the radius of this collision right here, but I think I'm going to keep it at 23, just like that. So now with this collision selected, if I scroll all the way down here, we see that we can create some events. So I want on component begin overlap to activate. So now whenever an actor is overlapping with that collision, then this will run. Now, I don't want it to overlap with everything and then it always runs, but I want it to overlap specifically just with this third person character. So we want to check if we are overlapping with a third person character by dragging from other actor and then typing in cast to third person character. So this will just cast a third person character, see if we are overlapping with the character. And if we are, we're going to drag from the third person character and we're going to call the event we just made called death. And death will run all these nodes that we made previously. So now if we press play, if I walk up to this pole, I'm not going to press F, and boom, automatically he ragdolls. So that is exactly what we want. So let's go back into BP underscore obstacle, and to just recap what is happening, whenever something is overlapping this collision, I'm going to go ahead and check if it is a third person character. If it is a third person character, then I'm going to tell the third person character to call the function called death, which will ragdoll our character. And then if it is not, then whatever is connected to this right here will be fired. But I'm just going to leave that blank. Right now, our obstacle isn't really that fun. It's just standing there. It's not really doing anything. So let's give this obstacle a spin. And we can do so with the right-click event tick. So the event tick is a little bit different from other events in that the event tick will run every single frame. So every single frame, any nodes that are connected to this will be activated. And from here, we're going to drag and let's make this add actor local rotation, just like this. So every single frame, I want to increase the rotation of this obstacle just a little bit. And I specifically want to increase the rotation. Let's say right here, let's make this 5 degrees. So now if we press play, we can see that our obstacle is rotating 5 degrees in the x-axis every single frame. And that's fine, but there's just one issue right now. and that is we are frame dependent. So we are dependent on how many frames our game is currently running. So let's say if someone is running this game on a system that's only 30 frames per second and not 120 frames like how it is right now. Well, if I press the backtick key that is right above the tab key, so if you press backtick, you'll get the console commands. And then we can type in t.max FPS 30, and now we're going to lock it to 30 frames. And we will see that now our obstacle is a lot slower and a lot easier. So we want this to be frame independent, where our obstacle will spin the same amount no matter the different frames. So I'm going to go press the backtick key again, and let's go t.max FPS 0 to bring back my default frames. And then I'll press escape. So from delta rotation, I'm going to drag from here, and then we're going to go make rotator, just like that. So now we can set 5 right here, but that's not what we're going to do since we need it times 5 by delta seconds. So if I drag from here and go times or multiply, we can multiply this by amount. So let's multiply this by 5. And now, because we're timesing 5 by delta seconds, essentially what delta seconds will do is that it will cancel out the differences per frame. And now all this logic is frame independent, which is exactly what we want. If we press play, this is going pretty slow right now, so let's increase this to 100 and press play. And we can see that this is spinning, but now it is frame independent. So even if we lower it to 30 frames per second, it will still be spinning the same exact amount, which is exactly what we want. Now we have a really nice obstacle, and if it goes, boom, it will just destroy our character. So we can go back into our level and we can copy and paste this around just a bunch, scale it, rotate it. And now if we press play, we see that we have an obstacle. So we have to run through here, but this obstacle it's really boring right now. So the reason why it's boring is because they're all spinning at the exact same rates. So I want a way to go in here and then individually set the spin rate right here within the details panel. So we can do that by using variables. And real quickly, I'll just adjust the different angles at which they are spinning because they're all spinning at the same angle. And now if I press play, okay, we can see that they are at different angles. And if I go back into BP_obstacle, I want a way to be able to control this amount right here, which is our spin amount, within my details panel of this obstacle. And we first need to make a variable from which it will contain this amount. So you can think of variables as basically containers of data. So we're going to make a variable that contains this number right here. And this number is a float. The reason why it is a float is because we are going by decimals. If it was just 100 by itself, then we would be using an integer, but because we want the decimal, it's a float. So to create a new variable, I want to come over to here and click on the plus icon. So that'll just create a new variable and we can call this something. I'm going to call this spin speed, just like that. And then I'm going to change it from a Boolean to a float. And I could do that right here. I could click on the Boolean icon and then I can select float just like that. And we'll see here that with my variable selected right there, we are unable to change the value. And that's because we need to compile first. And now we can change the value. So this will be our default value. And I'm just going to keep this at, let's say, a default of 100. Now we have to hook it up right here. So I can drag from spin speed, let go, and then I want to get spin speed. And then I'm going to simply just drag that right there into my multiplication. So now if I compile and save, if I press play, we will see that everything is still working great. And then if we go into landscape examples, and if we select these obstacles within their details, we are still unable to change that spin speed. And that's because within the blueprints, I specifically need to make sure this eye icon is turned on. Any variable with that eye icon turned on means we can edit that variable within the details panel. So now if I come back into landscape example and make sure you compile and save, we can see that we have spin speed right there set at the default of 100. So let's say we can make this one really slow. We can make this one 50. This one right here, we can make this one 500. Let's make this one right there, something random, 75. And this one, let's make this 300. So now if I press play, we can see that I'm able to control the amount all of these obstacles are spinning independently of each other, which is great and allows for a lot more customization than just having one spin amount. Now that we have our obstacle all set up, I think it's time that we add in a goal. So the goal specifically is at the very end of this obstacle course. Let's grab a statue. So within here, let's go into our starter content, props, and let's drag in this statue right here. And I'm going to go increase the size. And let's make this statue gold by again going into starter content. And within materials, I believe that we have, and let me go change the thumbnail size to medium. We have a gold material right here. So I'll drag gold just like that. And I'll drag gold onto the bottom here. Actually, I'll leave that as silver. I like the contrast between the silver and the gold. So I want it where, and if I can just walk around here right now. I want it where as soon as my character gets close to the gold, then a user interface will pop up that will tell us that we won the game. So first we need to create that user interface, and let's go into third person BP blueprints, and we'll create it right here. We need to right click, and under user interface we could create a widget blueprint. So I'll just call this one windscreen, just like that. And within here I'll double click here, and this will just be very brief since we're not going over how to create user interfaces within this video. But all you need to know is that I can drag in a text into the middle here. And if I click on anchors, I want to anchor this right into the middle of my screen. That's how this text will always be in the middle of my screen. And within the details panel of this text, let's change it. That's how it says you win and a bunch of exclamation points. And then under font, let's increase that size just a bit like this. And let's try a middle. Move this. That's how it's in the middle of my screen. And then I'm going to compile and save. Now, let's add in a collision within our world. So I can come up here into create. And within all classes, I can just type in box. And I want a box trigger. So I'll just drag from the box trigger right here. Let's scale it up just like this. So I want it whenever our character overlaps with this box trigger, then the windscreen will show up on the screen. To do that, we need to enter the level blueprint. So yes, you heard me correctly. Our entire world has a blueprint to itself. And we come up to blueprints and then select open level blueprints right here. So I'll delete everything that's in here right now. And you want to make sure that our box is selected since this level blueprint is context sensitive. So since our box is selected, our level blueprint knows that we want to do something to this box. And specifically, if I right click, we could call a function on our trigger box. I want to add an event. Let's go to collision. And let's add on actor begin overlap. And I want to make sure we are overlapping with the cast to third person character. That's how if a bird or some other object or even an obstacle crosses path with this trigger box, then our windscreen won't show. And now if I drag from here, we can create a widget, and we will be specifically creating our windscreen like that. So we'll select it from the drop down, and then we will add 2 viewports. So if I press play, and if I go around my obstacle course, so obviously that's a pretty big bug that we have in our game right now, and come up to it just like this, we see that we get the you win. So we just won the game, and that is how you create the worst game possible in the world, but it was a good demo to show the power of blueprints. So we can actually refine our game just a bit by coming into flatten, and I'll just select right here and then slowly start to decrease the size of this valley. So now if I press play we only have one option. We can't go around, and we have to try to navigate this obstacle course and try not to get destroyed just like that. So play around, try to make your own games, see what you can come up with, and have fun. So now it is finally time to work on our forest world. So this is going to be really fun, but before we can do that, a quick word from our sponsor. Just kidding, we don't have a sponsor, but if you do want to support the channel, then you can check out the Unreal Sensei Masterclass. The Masterclass is an ever-expanding collection of tutorials for Unreal Engine. And do not worry, there are a ton of free tutorials and free assets still planned for this channel. So if you want to check out the Masterclass and support the channel, there is a link in the description below. So with all that being said, let's jump into our forest. So let's create a project completely from scratch. I just opened up Unreal Engine 5 here, and let's go to Games. And let's specifically use the third-person template. That's because I want our little guy within our scene to help give our scene some scale as a reference for when we are creating our little village. And then it looks like it's automatically going to save on my desktop, which is what I want. And then I'm going to name this Creek Beginner. And I'm going to uncheck starter content since we don't need that. And I think all the defaults right now are completely fine. So let's create this project. So this is what you should see when you create your project. Keep in mind that we did edit our user interface just a bit. I added in the world settings. So you can get the world settings all the way up here within Windows world settings. And I collapsed all my panels to the right here by right-clicking and clicking. I think all the defaults right now.
So what came first, the grilled cheese or the...
It's time to help people customize and save with Liberty Mutual.
I need 3 uncorked slushes. Order up. Sonic uncorked slushes, ready for pickup. Hello guys. How is the sound first thing? Can you hear me? I'm gonna drag and drop my SWAT guy there. I'm gonna add to this guy the crawling animation. Sorry, here. The crawl backwards animation. Oh, where is my guy? Well, my guy now is out of screen, so I'm gonna... Coward! Where are you going? Beyond frame. Nice. Another Megascans assets I got here. So I downloaded. So, and then I'm gonna do this light. It's very soft. If the app different color spaces, you know, this is things. Every single version is adding new stuff. So I hope this thing became more stable, relying on the beauty. Thank you. Different ways, different workflows. If you are working in in a material. So if I go to if I select this and then I go here, I can see my material here, obviously. So, unblock our scene in an area that has a nice, and now I can see the framing. One tip, this by default is off. I download it and I drag and drop, add import. And what is it's already come with Unreal. It's out of. So once I start the sequence, the sequence editor, I can see a lot of parameters here. You know, like the film gate, the zoom.
Put our screen. Let's adjust our screens by clicking the drop down, going to layout and selecting dual screen. Now we can click the camera cut camera button to lock our screens to what our camera is seeing. Or just below it, we can click the camera's camera button to lock ourselves to the camera. Both of these do the same thing, but when you lock to your camera, you will pilot it, meaning we can move our camera around the same way we'd usually move around our screen. The annoying things to watch out for, because trust me, a lot of annoying things can happen in Sequencer. So the first thing we're going to do is click Cinematics at the top of the page and add Master Sequence. The main difference between these options is that a level sequence will create one clip and a master sequence will create numerous clips we can work with. So when you do this, the Sequencer tool will pop up, and if you ever lose this tab, you can right click your sequence in your level and click Edit, or you can go up to the Cinematics at the top and select your sequence here. So this is your timeline, and by pressing space, your timeline will run and your movie will play. Now, before we do anything, I'd recommend clicking the FPS button and changing your FPS to 60. This will increase the number of frames seen on screen per second. So this will make your video seem more smooth and focused. I'd highly recommend going for 60 FPS or higher if you're making a trailer for realism, and 30 FPS for gameplay to give it a more video game feel. So I'm going to click the drop down and select 60 FPS. Also, I like to see my timeline in seconds rather than frames, so I'm going to click show time as and then select seconds, but this is up to you guys. Now, let's dive into our first shot by double clicking on it. So this is our sequence. Our camera cut is basically our movie clip, and we have one track in our sequence, which is a camera, and it has various properties. So first, let's set up our viewport, our screen. Let's adjust our screens by clicking the drop down, going to layout and selecting dual screen. Now we can click the camera cut camera button to lock our screens to what our camera is seeing. Or just below it, we can click the camera's camera button to lock ourselves to the camera. Both of these do the same thing, but when you lock to your camera, you will pilot it, meaning we can move our camera around the same way we'd usually move around our screen. It can be useful for setting up the camera into the correct position, but I prefer manually adjusting the camera, so I'm going to click the camera cuts camera button. So we want our left screen to be our normal viewport. So let's click the drop down and uncheck allow cinematic control. And let's put the viewport back to normal perspective mode. Okay, cool. So normal view left, camera view right. So sometimes you'll need a bigger screen to see details or to watch your scene back. For this, we can either click the button in the top right of the screen to take over both screens, or we can press F11 with the screen selected to take it to full screen. Then we can press F11 again to take us back out again. To alter a clip's length, we need to do a few things. We first need to extend the clip by moving the red line over to the right. We then need to actually extend our camera cut clip. Make sure this clip is always filling the entire bar. Then you'll also see another red line here, which we can't do anything with. And to extend this, we actually need to hop out of our clip by selecting our sequence master, and we need to extend the actual length of our clip here. Now, if you want to create another clip, we can either right click one of our shots and duplicate, or we can click the plus symbol and either insert a pre-existing shot or click insert shot to create a new one. Okay, that's all the settings out of the way. Let's create some clips. So hop into your scene 1. So here we have our camera and its numerous settings. Now, very quickly, aperture is how much of the scene you want to be in focus. low aperture being a small amount, and high aperture being a large amount. Focal length, to put very simply, is how wide or zoomed in your shot is, and focus distance is where your camera is focusing on. So what we can do is go to 0 on our timeline, move our camera into a start position, then click the plus sign by our camera transform to create a keyframe. And a keyframe is basically just a bit of stored information, and in this case, we've stored a transform. Now we're going to select our camera actor and look in the details. Click the focus settings drop down, and what we can do is position our left screen into a similar position as our camera. Then we can select the eyedropper in the details and click on our screen where we want our camera to focus. When you click, your camera will adjust its focus to focus on the point you clicked on. But sometimes it doesn't get it right, or your click may go through the object. For this, I'd recommend bringing in a cube, placing the cube over the point you want to focus on, and selecting the cube using the focus eyedropper. This just guarantees you get the right focus point and your click doesn't go through the object. Now, if you want to change our focus multiple times in one shot, we can click the keyframe button to store the focus point. Then we can move down the timeline, change our focus, and click the keyframe button again to store a different focus. So now let's move down the timeline, click on our camera actor and move it into a new position. Then click the keyframe button by the transform. And it is highly important that you move the camera actor, not the camera component. You can think of the camera actor as a blueprint and the camera an object inside the blueprint. If we move the camera component, we will be offsetting the camera's location inside the blueprint. That's why if we select the camera, you can see it has a transform of 0, 0, 0. So remember, move the camera actor, don't offset the camera component. So once we make another keyframe, we now have a camera movement path. So the camera will move from the first keyframe to the next over time. So this is the workflow you always want to follow when moving your camera. Move your timeline to the time you want your keyframe to occur, move the camera, and create a keyframe and set the focus. If you move your camera before moving your timeline, when you move your timeline again, the camera will snap back to the last keyframe's position and you'll have to redo the camera transform. So remember this workflow, and it's the same for objects, but without setting the focus. And that is everything you need to know on how to control sequencer. Now let's go over some effects and different ways you can capture a scene. So before we get into creating a scene, I first need to show you how you can have lots of different shots all in the same environment. So let's say we want two clips, one of our characters standing still and one of our characters sitting down. And we want to capture this in the same spot in our map. Well, what we can do is select our actor in the level, then select track in sequencer, click actor to sequence, and our actor, if selected, should be at the top. Now we've added our actor to the track, what we can do is right click the actor and convert to spawnable. We can also do this to convert the actor back to possessable. You will now see a lightning bolt next to our character, and this just means our actor is now scene specific. So it will disappear in other scenes and reappear in this scene. Okay, moving on. How do we actually make actors and objects do things on our screen? Well, what you need to remember is that when you're capturing a scene, you have no control over your character or object. So all the actions must be set up before we hit that render button. And to make a scene, we use a combination of three things: animations, blueprints, and sequencer settings. So let's start with animation. You'll need an animation for all of your scenes involving characters. And the most common way of using an animation is by bringing in a skeletal mesh, adding the actor to the shot, clicking on the plus sign, then under animation, selecting the animation you want that mesh to play. Our character will now play our selected animation, and we can adjust it by extending the clip to loop it, or we can change the position of the animation along the timeline by clicking and dragging it. So here are some examples where I used animation. We've got our nodding scene, we've got our looking down scene, and waving scene. So you'll use animation for almost every one of your scenes. So I really hate to say it, guys, but you might need to practice your animating skills. Once we've got some animations in our scene, we're most likely going to want some interactions or functionality to be going on. A door opening, an explosion going off. This is all done in Blueprint. Just think of any Blueprint functionality you've learned over the time working with game dev, and you can use this knowledge to bring your scene alive. What we can do is either call blueprint nodes to run on a delay, or we can call events directly from Sequencer. To call a blueprint from Sequencer, we can add that actor to the track. Then we can click the plus sign next to the actor. Under Events, click Trigger. From here, we can add a keyframe, then right-click that keyframe. Under Properties, select the Event dropdown, go to Quick Bind, and type in the name of your event. This will now trigger your event at the time you set it in the timeline. So for functionality, use blueprints. Here's some scenes where I used blueprints. The train moving was actually a cube set to rotate back and forth. All the train components were then attached to this object. The conveyor belt was actually just a striped material, where inside the blueprint we turned panning on and off to make it look like the conveyor belt was moving. For picking up objects, I actually had 3 different objects in a blueprint with our character. The objects would then attach to the mannequin's hand out of line of sight. Then the mannequin would move, the item would detach, and when the item was moved off the screen by the conveyor belt, they were teleported back into the original position. So unless you want to animate all these objects doing these things, it's cheap tricks like these which allow blueprints to really have an impact on the functionality of a scene. Once we have our animation done, and we have our blueprinting functionality done, we can now tweak both these things in Sequencer. The main way I use Sequencer is to change the transform of an object. For example, if we want to move our character while he plays a running animation, we can make 2 keyframes with him at different positions and change the transform. We can also add tracks to our actors or blueprints in a scene. So let's take our third-person character, for example. Let's first add him to our scene. Now we can click on the plus sign and look through the components to decide what we want to change. So let's add the skeletal mesh. Then for the skeletal mesh, we can click on the plus sign again to change certain properties of that mesh. And there are loads you can choose from, but let's say we want to change the mesh color. We find the material we want to change, so element 0. Then we can change the parameters of that material. So the only parameter in this material is body color, so we can change that. Now we can change our body color inside Sequencer. For anyone wondering how to fade in a character or make them disappear, this is the method you use, except you'd make a parameter for opacity inside the material, then change the opacity over time in Sequencer. So there are loads of different tweaks you can do to actors in Sequencer, so be sure to have a mess around with them. And that is everything you need to know to actually create a scene. Just remember, create animations for characters or objects if you want them moving in a very specific way. Use blueprints to create events and actions triggering in your scene. And use Sequencer to polish up both of these things with different tweaks and effects. Now let's go over a few more important techniques. Here we have the curve editor. If we click the graph button next to our FPS, we can adjust how each keyframe transitions from one to another. By default, our keyframes are set to fade in and out, but we can click on a keyframe to adjust it manually by moving the line, or we can choose one of the above settings. So feel free to mess around with these settings, but for the majority of the clips, you'll either use the default settings or linear settings, which goes from one keyframe to another with no fade in. Of course, there are loads of other options, so do have a play around with them. And remember, if you're adjusting keyframes yourself, less keyframes and less adjusting looks a lot more smoother and more natural. So keep that in mind. We can add slow motion by adding a new track, then adding time dilation and adjusting it over here. We can fade in our clips by adding in the fade track, then keyframing it to go from 0 to 1 over time at the start and 1 to 0 at the end. When it comes to movement, like I said earlier, you can give your character a moving animation, then you can keyframe the character to go from one location to another by adjusting the transform. This is a perfectly fine method, but if you've got your character's feet in the shot, you might bump into some issues with the feet sliding around. To fix this, you can use root motion, which basically uses the root bone to drive the movement of the character. For this, you first need a root motion animation where the root moves with the character. You then need to open up the animation and check root motion inside the details. And from there, you can convert your animation to a montage and play the montage in your character blueprint. Voila! The movement is now driven by the animation. So here's something you need to watch out for. It can be really annoying if you don't know about it, and it's pissed me off numerous times in the past. If you're trying to delete an object on the screen, but you have something selected inside Sequencer like a keyframe or an object, when you press delete, you will be deleting your keyframe or the object, not the actual item inside your level that you're trying to delete. If this happens, you can press Ctrl Z to undo, which will deselect anything in Sequencer, then you can delete your object, or you can click somewhere in Sequencer to deselect your item, then you can delete the object in the level. Okay, final thing, rendering. What we can do is click the action button next to the spanner to bring up the render menu. So we can start by deciding our output directory here. This is where your renders will be saved to on your PC. Now, time for the important stuff. Always render your clips in 4K resolution. Even if you plan to re-render the footage in 1080p, the quality of your footage will be insanely better if you render in 4K. So make sure you do this. Next is compression. And compression is basically the software compressing the file size of your clips down to become more manageable. However, this also comes with the price of having a reduced quality. So this setting is completely dependent on how much space you have on your PC and what quality you're looking for. Now here's what I'd recommend. For anyone who wants good quality and very manageable clip sizes, go for 75 compression, and a 4-second clip will set you back around 30 megabytes. For anyone who wants amazing quality and has a big ass hard drive, go for 100 compression. A 4-second clip will set you back around 1 gigabyte. This was the setting I used for my mannequin cinematic. And for anyone who wants the best possible quality, uncheck use compression, but be prepared for a huge file size. I can't remember exactly, but for my pirate cinematic, I rendered something like an 8-second clip without compression being checked, and it hit me for around 35 gigabytes. Now, one more thing you need to know. Sequencer is made in a way where you can create all your clips and then render the entire sequence in the master sequence. If you want my advice, do not do it this way. Back when I was new to Sequencer, I tried using this method, and regardless of the settings, I couldn't manage to render past a minute of my footage due to crashes. But I could render each clip separately, no problem. So if you want my advice, especially if you're rendering with little to no compression, render each clip separately, then put them into a video editing software and put the clips together there. And a quick disclaimer for anyone trying to watch their clips after they've rendered them with little amounts of compression, don't worry, your clips will probably lag. I'm running an RTX 280 Super, and when I try to watch my clips, they lag an insane amount. However, once you've imported them into a video editing software and rendered them out, you won't face this issue. This does, however, bring up the issue that you can't edit your video properly because of the frame lag. So if you're going to be doing a lot of precise video editing, like timing a video to music, for example, what I'd recommend is rendering on a low compression first, then editing your clips, and then replacing the low quality clips with high quality clips at the end. So guys, that is it for me. If you have any questions, be sure to drop them in the comment section.
Dare to sleep like you're not on your period? On your period. Always Z's disposable period underwear gives you 360-degree protection, keeping you covered unlike any pad. Try Always Z's. Dare to sleep free.
In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a cinematic using Unreal Engine 5, while also showing you how to import content from Blender. Now, when it comes to importing content into Unreal Engine, there are so many ways to do it, and the exact method that you choose will really depend on your workflow and the kind of pipeline you're going for, because there's a whole range of different 3D model formats to importing content and animations and different types of packed content like textures. But alongside that, there's a bunch of other add-ons and tools to speed up that process, such as Send to Unreal, which is the official add-on by Epic for connecting imported the content. So I can now click my human male static mesh and drag that in, and maybe I'm going to make him a bit bigger. One note to make here is that you can change the transform gizmo by pressing the Q, W, E, and R hotkeys. This is something that's very familiar to other game engines as well. So W will give you the move gizmo, E will give you rotation, and R will give you scale. So I make sure that my cursor is in the middle of this gizmo, so we're doing all of the axes at the same time. I make sure that my cursor is in the middle rotation, and R will give you move gizmo, E will give you rotation, and R will give you scale. So I make sure that my cursor will give you the move gizmo, E will give you rotation as well. So W will give you the move gizmo, E will give you rotation, and R will give you scale. So I make sure that my cursor is in the middle of this gizmo, so we're doing all of the axes at the same time, and then dragging from side to side to make it larger. Another thing I want to do, just for a little bit of extra visual variety, because I don't have any textures for this object, is double click on the material, so it brings up the nodes. Now, the reason why it's generated this material for us is because it was packaged in with the FBX file. Because if you remember, in my blend file, the object had the PBR body material applied to it, and this is just a basic plain material with a principled BSDF shader. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on this parameter and change the default value to maybe some kind of orange. Let me move this out of the way so I can see. Maybe something like that. And then for a bit of fun, I'm going to grab a noise node and plug that into the roughness. And this is just going to give us a bit of like a high frequency change in reflection. So what that will do is it will just start to reflect some of the scene for us. And this is just because I don't have any textures. I think it will just make it a bit more interesting when we're doing our cinematic. Okay, so now that we have our object in the scene, how do we make a cinematic? Well, when learning how to do this, I was very surprised at how easy it was to actually make a cinematic in Unreal. It seems like they've made it very familiar for artists and photographers and anyone that's done camera work in the past. The first thing we want to do is go up to Window, then Cinematics, and make sure that we have the sequencer window open. I have mine docked down the bottom here, so I'm just going to expand that. So basically, the sequencer will contain our timeline for our animation. And when it comes to making animated cinematics like this in Unreal, the data is stored inside of an object called a level sequence. So you can see down here in the content browser, I have a folder called cinematics. I'm going to make this object now by right-clicking, going to animation, and then choosing level sequence. I'm going to name this cinematic 1. And then I'm going to double click on it to make sure that that's what we're editing now in the sequencer. So you can see now that we have a timeline where we can make changes to anything that we want to edit in the scene. But now how can we preview what we're looking at to make sure that level sequence, and then choosing level cinematics. I'm going to make this object now by right clicking, going to animation, and then choosing level sequence. I'm going to name this cinematic 1. And then I'm going to double click on it to make sure that that's what we're editing now in the sequencer. So you can see now that we have a time, the data is stored inside, expand that. Camera work in the past, it was to actually make a cinematic in Unreal. It seems like they've made it very familiar for artists and photographers and anyone that's done camera work in the past. The first thing we want to do is go up to Window, then Cinematics, and make sure that we have the sequencer window open. I have mine docked down the bottom here, so I'm just going to expand that. So basically, the sequencer will contain our timeline for our animation. And when it comes to making animated cinematics like this in Unreal, the data is stored inside of an object called a level sequence. So you can see down here in the content browser, I have a folder called cinematics. I'm going to make this object now by right-clicking, going to animation, and then choosing level sequence. I'm going to name this cinematic 1. And then I'm going to double click on it to make sure that that's what we're editing now in the sequencer. So you can see now that we have a timeline where we can make changes to anything that we want to edit in the scene. But now how can we preview what we're looking at through a camera? Well, if you click up in the top left here where it's got perspective in the 3D view, we can change the viewport from the default viewport to the cinematic viewport. And in doing this, you can see that Unreal is actually starting to look like a video editing program. We have our buttons down the bottom here for our playback. We can play and pause and move to different frames and keyframes and snap to the start and end. So it's all very familiar. A quick note to make about this window is that when you're editing sequences, it's quite easy to get confused when you're zoomed in. So if you hold Control and scroll out, you can zoom out of the sequence. And if you right-click and drag, you can pan it along. But okay, how do we animate a camera? Well, if you have a camera in your scene, like I do up here, you can click and drag that into the sequencer window and it will add it to the timeline. So we now have the camera on the timeline ready to be animated, but we're not really looking for it in the viewport. So how do we make that happen? But if you take a look down at the actual camera object here in the sequencer, there's an icon to the right of it that says lock the camera to selected viewport. So if I click on that, we are now looking through the camera, and a key point about this is that we can move it around. So that's fantastic. Now what about adding keyframes and actually making the camera move? Well, on the left down here, we can see that there are different parameters for the camera, which we can change. But when you're animating the camera movement, there's only two things we need to care about, which are the location and the rotation. So if I collapse this camera component and open the transform, you can see them here, so location and rotation. The way that we add keyframes for this is by pressing the circle button here in the middle where it says add a new key at the current time. Now before doing this, I'm just making sure that the timeline is set at time 0. So we can do this by pressing the to front button. And then I'm going to press to add those keyframes now. And in doing so, you will see these two small dots appear on the timeline. So that's great. The position has been recorded for the start of the animation, but how do we add more? Well, you can move the timeline forward and move the camera around in the 3D view and add those again manually. But if you paid close attention, then you'll see that they were added automatically for me when I moved the camera. And the reason this happened is because I had the auto keying option enabled by pressing this button here. You can see by hovering over this, it says create a key when channel/properties change, only automatically adds a key when there's already a track with at least one key. So this is useful for if you wanted to do animations where the camera's flying around. You can just scrub the timeline forward, move the camera a bit, and then keep doing that. And then if we went to play it back, you can see that it will move the camera for us. You do want to be careful though, because if you wanted to look around your scene, like fly around, see for any cool opportunities for more cinematic shots, and you left that option enabled, then when you go back to play the animation, you might find that the camera starts moving around all over the environment. So you want to make sure that's disabled when you don't need it. Now, another thing to keep in mind about these keyframes is that you can change the interpolation mode. So you can see that as we're moving from keyframe to keyframe, it's quite smooth because it's easing in and out of those positions. But if we select these and right click, you can see that there's a section called key interpolation, and we can change the interpolation mode here. So if you wanted, you could set it to linear, where instead of easing in and out of those positions, it's just going to reach the point and then immediately change direction. So it's not a smooth change anymore. And we can see this more clearly when I play this back. Now, you would use cubic and linear for different reasons. Linear is quite useful for if you just wanted to do like a turntable or a very simple movement of a camera and you didn't know exactly where you were going to cut it when doing like an animated short. So you want a consistent speed of the camera moving throughout that entire scene. So you can easily change where you're cutting it without it looking like it's ramping up or slowing down in speed. So that's quite useful. But another useful tip is that if you have these keyframes selected, you can change the interpolation mode they're using by pressing 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we have 1, 2, 3 being the different types of cubic, 4 being linear, and 5 being constant. And if you're wondering what constant is, it basically just snaps to the next point. So for the sake of having a smooth animation, I'm going to leave it on cubic for now. So what I want to do is enable the auto keying and move these keyframes into a more appropriate position. So I've got auto keying on, I'm set at position 0. I want my camera to start here. And because there are keyframes already at this point, it's going to override them. Then I can press this button here to jump to the next keyframe in the section. Let me get a bit more of a close-up. So if I check this by scrubbing back, you can see that the camera comes up. And then let me grab this next one and do it so it kind of comes over the shoulder, maybe looking at this giant head. Okay, so I feel like at the moment, the speed goes a bit too quickly when moving from keyframe 2 to keyframe 3. So what we can do is we can click on this and then move it along. So yes, you're perfectly free to move the keyframes along the timeline wherever you like. But maybe I feel like the entire animation is going a bit too quickly, so I want to make it a bit longer. If I drag this red bar over to the right, we can increase the overall length of the timeline. And similarly, we need to increase the length of this camera clip as well to match that. And then I can click to drag out these keyframes to make them play over a longer period of time. So if I press space to play this back, you can see the camera moves up over the shoulder of our static mesh, and then over to look at the other face. So this is a very basic but perfectly fine animation. So now that we've made it, how do we export it to a video file? So if you come over to the top left of the sequencer window, you'll see that there's a bunch of buttons, and one of them will let you export to a video. So you can see it's the one here with the clapboard. It says render this movie to a video or image frame sequence. So you have those both options available. So if I click on this, it will bring up a new window. So you can change the image output format. I have mine set to the video sequence.avi. You can change the audio output format if that's something you needed. You can also change the frame rate. I think it's on 60 by default, but I'm only going to be using 30 for this. You can then change the resolution. I recommend having it a bit higher than you need. So I'm going to go for the 3840 by 2160. But if you like, you can set a custom resolution as well. That would probably be useful for if you wanted to do any kind of like ultra wide recordings. And then you have basic options for the compression and the quality and where to export the file format and what to name it. So when you're happy with that, you can just press Capture Movie. It will then prompt you to save the scene, and then it will begin. When you do this, you will see a small window appear, and this basically gives you a preview for what's being rendered. And it won't show you the entire frame, but it's just an 60. But if you like, you can set a custom resolution as well. That would probably be useful for if you wanted to do any kind of like ultra wide recordings. And then you have basic options for the compression and the quality and where to export the file format and what to name it. So when you're happy with that, you can just press Capture Movie. It will then prompt you to save the scene, and then it will begin. When you do this, you will see a small window appear, and this basically gives you a preview for what's being rendered. And it won't show you the entire frame, but it's just enough to see that something's actually going on. So I'm going to skip ahead now to the point where this is done. So I can play the cinematic back, and you can immediately see that there's something a bit weird about the lighting, and that's to do with the lumen global illumination, because it takes a second to calculate exactly what the lighting should look like. So is there a way we can get around this? And yeah, there are a few options. You could have a few seconds at the beginning of your timeline down here where nothing happens and then the camera starts moving just to give it a moment to start calculating the lighting. But there's another thing you can do, which is if you go down to the animation settings, you can set a warm-up frame counter. Now, the warm-up frame counter is good for particle systems. So if you wanted particle effects to kind of get to a more mature state before you start recording, that's handy. So I've just given this a little buffer of about 60 frames, which isn't much. If we're recording at 30 frames a second, we can say that's about 2 seconds of warm-up time. So even though there aren't any particles in the scene, I'm just doing it just in case. But if I expand this, you can also see that there are options for delaying time before a warm-up and before shots. And this is measured in seconds. So say I want to add maybe 3 seconds of time for the lighting to calculate. We can give that a try. So if I press capture movie again, it's going to do a re-render. And now when I play this back, you can see that the lighting has been pre-calculated because we've given it those extra seconds to get the lighting right before actually starting the recording. So this is important if you have any kind of post-processing effects or lighting or anything else that needs to adjust just before capturing those frames. So now, at the end of all of this, you have your video which you can take away and do whatever you like with. So basically, that's how you import content from Blender to Unreal, and that's how you make cinematics. Now, of course, there are lots of other caveats and options and settings and tips and tricks which you can play around with in here, but hopefully this has given you a bit of a basic introduction to how to get kind of animated sequences and export them from Unreal. So thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then feel free to like, subscribe, comment, maybe sign up to the Patreon to get your name at the end of videos, maybe even check out my resources. So thanks for watching, stay safe, and I will see you next time. So recently I've been having a lot of fun playing with LiDAR scans and combining
Everyone's looking forward to the school year, but sometimes the best part about being back is the excitement of heading home.
So in this video, we are going to create a cinematic shot that will look something like this. So you'll learn everything about cinematics inside the engine, and I'm going to explain everything. So this is a beginner friendly video. You'll learn about the cinematic camera, you'll learn about the sequencer, and you'll also learn how to render your videos using the movie render queue. Before I start the video, a huge shout out to all the people who support the channel on Patreon. If you want to support the channel, head on to my Patreon page. So to follow along, you can use any scene that you like. So the first thing that you need to add is a camera. So you need to add a cinematic camera actor. You can also turn on the unlit mode if you want. Now we need to position the camera. So you can move this camera as you move any object inside Unreal Engine by using the move tool right here. But there's a better way to position your camera. So you can go to the perspective and you will see a new option right here for your camera. So in order not to get confused here, you can just rename your camera first. So I'm going to rename it to main camera. And back in the perspective panel right here, you can just select that main camera. So now the main camera is active. So now you can pretty much move your camera and you can position a shot. So you can frame a basic shot. So I've framed a basic shot right here. This looks pretty good. After you have positioned your camera, let's take a look at some of the important settings that you need to know. So make sure that your camera is selected. And down in the details panel, the first important option is film back. So this is basically the sensor size of your camera. So if you are into photography or videography, this is quite similar. So for example, if I change it to the IMAX sensor, you can see that we have a very large sensor size. And the aspect ratio is also different. So it is a square aspect ratio. So you can select whatever you like, but I'll recommend photography. This is quite similar. So for example, important settings that you need to know. So make sure that your camera is selected. And down in the details panel, the first important option is film back. So this is basically the sensor size of your camera. So if you are into photography or video, in the perspective panel right here, you can just select that main camera. Main camera. So in order not to get confused here, you can just rename your camera first. So I'm going to rename it to main camera. And back in the perspective panel right here, you can just select that main camera. So now the main camera is active. So now you can pretty much move your camera and you can position a shot. You can just select that main camera. Back in the perspective panel right here, you can just select that main camera. So now the main camera is active. So now you can pretty much move your camera and you can position a shot. So you can frame a basic shot. So I've framed a basic shot right here. This looks pretty good. After you have positioned your camera, let's take a look at some of the important settings that you need to know. So make sure that your camera is selected. And down in the details panel, the first important option is film back. So this is basically the sensor size of your camera. So if you are into photography or videography, this is quite similar. So for example, if I change it to the IMAX sensor, you can see that we have a very large sensor size. And the aspect ratio is also different. So it is a square aspect ratio. So you can select whatever you like, but I'll recommend that you select the 16:9 DSLR, and that will give you a lot of realism. The next setting is the lens settings. It's really important that you understand this. So there are two types of lens in cameras. So one is called the prime lens and one is called the zoom lens. The prime lens will have a fixed focal length, so you can't change the focal length. And the zoom lens has a variable focal length. So it has a minimum and a maximum focal length, and you can zoom in and zoom out. So these lenses will basically define the field of view of your shot. So for example, if I select the 105mm lens, you can see that we have a much tighter shot. And if I select the 12mm lens, you can see that we have a wide angle shot. So this completely depends on what you want to capture. So just play with this, and this will completely depend on your scene, as I said. And here, whichever lens you select, whether prime or zoom, you will have an aperture for that lens. So the bokeh effect will be different for different lenses. After that, we have the setting for focus. So you can change that to tracking. So you need to select your object. And as you can see, this object is in focus right now. And the background is blurry. If you want to visualize this focus distance, you can turn on the debug plane. And you can also give it an offset. So if you want to offset the focus, you can completely do that. So those were the basic camera settings that you need to know. So now we have configured our camera settings. We have configured the focus and the lens. So now let's create a cinematic shot. Let's create a cutscene. So to create a cutscene, you need to go to the cinematics panel and you need to create something called as a sequence. So the sequence is basically a cinematic shot. So save your sequence, give it a name. After you have saved your sequence, you will see a new window right here called the sequencer window. So you can drag and move the handle of the timeline. So now we want to animate our camera. So to animate anything inside a sequence, you need to add that object in the sequence. So just select the object from the world outliner and just drag it in the sequence. So just like that, we have the main camera in the sequence and we have all the default properties of the main camera. So we can start animating them. So before you start animating things, you need to do one thing. So you need to turn on the cinematic view. And this cinematic view is going to give you a lot of options. But now you can see that our main camera is deactivated. So you will need to activate that camera again. So our setup is done. So let's actually animate things. So you can see your current frame number right here. So just go to frame 1. So we want to animate the transform of the camera. That is the position, rotation and scale. So you can just add a keyframe. Just click right here to add a keyframe. After that, go to any frame you like. And then you can move your camera however you like. So now I'm going to zoom out to create a zoom out animation. After you have done that, let's key this value. So let's add a keyframe. So this animation is looking good, but I'm going to fix one more thing here. So you can select all your keyframes and you can right click and you can set the interpolation method. So currently we are getting a fade in and a fade out effect. So that is basically set to the cubic interpolation, but we need a constant speed. So you can set that to the linear interpolation and that will give you a constant speed. So now let me show you how to render this out. So to render this, you need to turn on some plugins. So go in the plugins panel and you can turn on the movie render queue plugins. So make sure that these plugins are turned on. After you have turned those on, you can go into the cinematics panel and you can turn on the movie render queue. So movie render queue is the latest way of rendering things inside Unreal Engine. I think this was introduced in UE 4.26, I believe. So the way the movie render queue works is that you need to add sequences inside it. Once you have added your sequence, you need to configure some settings. So click right here and this is going to open up another panel for the settings. So as you can see, by default, this is going to be rendered as a JPEG sequence. So just delete that. After you have deleted that, you can add your own file format. I prefer to render these as images, as PNG images. So next we have the setting for the rendering method. This will be set to deferred rendering. So make sure that you don't change anything. Next we have the output settings. So this is where you will define your output folder. You can also define the file name. You can change the resolution. And here there is a very handy option to set the start and the end frames. So if you want to render a specific part of your animation, you can do that by changing these values. Next, we have the option for frame rate. So in the sequencer, you can see what your frame rate is set to. By default, it is going to be set to 30. So if you want that cinematic look, change it to 24. We have defined all the output settings. Everything is looking good. But I'm going to show you one more thing that will take your renders to the next level. So you can go to the add panel and you can add anti-aliasing. And this option is a complete game changer. So in the anti-aliasing settings, you will see an option for samples. So you can change the samples value to whatever you like. I'm going to change it to 32, but the higher you set this, the higher quality renders you will get. So if you set this value to a very high number, something like 256 or 512, you will get very long render time. So make sure that you set this to a value of 32 or 64. And once you have changed that, you also need to turn off the anti-aliasing. So override this and just set it to none. Okay, everything looks good. Now let's save this preset. So you can save this preset by clicking the save as preset. And you can save this preset, so give it a name. So if you wanted to use these render settings for a different sequence, you could completely do that. And now you can pretty much render your animation. So there are two buttons here, render local and render remote. So click the render local animation. Okay, so the rendering has been done. So these are the images. And as you can see, we are getting a very cinematic look. So the anti-aliasing samples will give you a very realistic look. So this is the difference between rendering using the movie render queue and rendering using the sequencer. You could render using the sequencer, but you will not get that quality, that cinematic quality. So if you like this video, please leave a like down below. Also subscribe to the channel. And that's it. I'm going to see you in the next video.
What is that?
So in this tutorial, we are going to create this grassy meadow scene inside Unreal Engine 5. As always, this is going to be a very easy tutorial. So it's going to be a beginner friendly tutorial. I'm going to explain everything. So this is a very good video for. So if you're interested, you can check directional lamp and atmospheric fog. What you can do is, first of all, delete the things that you don't need. So delete the flow and delete the sky sphere. Next, I'm going to add some clouds and I'm also going to add some exponential height fog. So this looks pretty cool. So this is going to be a basic setup. Now you can select the exponential height fog and you can also turn on the volumetric fog in the exponential height fog settings. So that is going to give you some more realism. Now in order to change your lighting, you can press Ctrl L and after that you can move your mouse. So that shortcut is going to allow you to basically rotate the directional lamp. Let's create a landscape. So you can go in the landscape panel and this is the landscape panel. So we are going to pretty much leave everything to the default settings. So we are not going to touch anything. The default settings work pretty well. So this green grid that you are seeing is going to be the final landscape when we create it. So let's create a landscape. And as you can see, we have a huge landscape here. This looks pretty cool. Let's exit out from the landscape mode. So our lighting looks pretty good, but let's check and verify that we are using lumen. So you can go to edit project settings. You can search for lumen. And here make sure that global illumination and reflections is both set to lumen. After that, let's add a post-processing volume. And the post-processing volume is generally used to add some effects in a game. So first you can search for exposure and I'm going to turn the auto exposure off. So you can turn on minimum brightness, maximum brightness, and you can set that to 1. This will make sure that the exposure remains constant. But as you can see, the post-processing volume doesn't work out of the box. So we need to apply this post-processing volume to the whole level, to the whole scene. So you can search for infinite extents and you can turn that on. And that will make sure that this post-processing volume is applied to the whole scene. Okay, now in order for lumen to work, we need to do a couple of things. So in the skylight, change the mobility to movable, and turn on real-time capture. You can also increase the quality of the cube map, the resolution. Next, we are going to do the same thing. We are going to set the mobility of the directional light to movable. So now we have totally dynamic lighting. Okay, so now our lighting looks good, like the lighting is done. So you can press Control Space and that is going to open up the content browser. Right click and we are going to add an asset from the Quixel Megascans library. So this is a new thing. UE5 supports Quixel Megascans, like it is integrated in the engine. So let's add a material for our ground plane. So I've just downloaded this mossy grass material. So you can just download this and you can press the add button and that will import it inside Unreal Engine. Similarly, I'm going to import the grass model right here. So I've also downloaded some additional assets. So if you want, you can easily add a lot of assets in your scene and you can give your scene that realism. So after a ground material is imported, we can just select the landscape and we can go in the material tab and you can just search for grass. So this material is called mossy grass, and just like that we have a cool landscape and we can go in the material, a lot of assets in your scene and you can give your scene that realism. So after a ground material is imported, we can just select the landscape and we can go in the material tab and you can just search for grass. So this material is called mossy grass, and just like that we have a cool landscape material. You can double click on this material to open it, and I'm going to just change the tiling. So enable the tiling and change it to a lower number because currently we can see the repetition in the texture. Okay, this looks pretty cool. Now let's add some grass. So let's add some foliage in our scene. So select the landscape and go in the foliage panel. Here you'll notice that Unreal Engine will automatically tag these meshes as foliage meshes. You can enable these meshes by selecting all of them. So shift and select all of them, and then you can turn on the tick mark, and that is going to make sure that that asset is enabled. So if you want, you can add flowers and rocks here. You can choose to paint grass in some areas and choose to paint rocks in some areas. So this is a very easy workflow. So as you can see, our grass looks pretty good. So you can pretty much paint this grass, but I'll just go through some additional settings. So make sure that all of the grass meshes are selected. And down here, I'm going to increase the density to 256. And I'm going to change the minimum and maximum scale here. So that will make sure that we have some variation in our scene. And here we have a lot of settings for our grass. So you can also turn on the shadows for our grass. So if your computer is lagging, you can just turn off the shadows. Okay, up here we have all the settings for our brush. So we have the size and we have the paint density. And as you can see, the quality of these meshes is pretty good. And the LODs are also configured. So this is optimized for games out of the box.
Hey designers, want to know how I work like a freelancer but deliver like a studio? I use Envato Elements.
So our grass looks pretty good, but first I'm going to add a focus element in my scene. So you can press Control Space to open up the content browser, and you can right click and import an FBX object. So this model is scanned by this guy. I got it from Sketchfab. So this is not 3D model, this is 3D scanned. So as you can see, this has a lot of polygons. And since you are using Unreal Engine 5, you can turn on Nanite. And this will further optimize your mesh. So once you are done with that, you can pretty much drag this model in your scene. As you can see, the scale is not right. So I'm going to change the scale to something like 0.2. A value of 0.2 looks good. So now it's time to actually blend this asset with the ground and with the grass. So you can switch between these transform tools by pressing the W key, the E key and the R key. So those are for location, rotation and scale. And for this step, I like to work in the unlit mode. So now the asset is blended, but we need to do some additional blending. And for that, you can go in the landscape mode. In the landscape mode, you can go to the sculpt panel that will be selected by default. And you can sculpt the edges around this house. So just raise these edges up. And as you can see, this really helps to blend the house with the landscape. You could also add some additional assets like some rocks around the house to further blend this. Once you are happy with that, you can always select the smooth brush and you can smooth these edges. And this always takes some time, so take your time with this, don't rush. So this looks good to me. I'm going to switch back to the lit mode and you will notice that we don't have good lighting. So we are going to fix that in a moment. But first, I am going to add some grass assets everywhere in the scene. So make sure that you have all these grass assets near the horizon line as well. And that gives our scene a very realistic look. Now I'm going to select the volumetric clouds. So just change these settings and see what suits your scene. So just rotate your directional lamp until you get some good shadows. Now we are going to go back in the post-processing volume and let's do some basic post-processing. You can search for Ambient Occlusion. So Ambient Occlusion basically is contact shadows. So you will get a shadowing effect where two surfaces intersect. As you can see, there are a lot of settings right here that you can play with. Finally, I'm going to give it some depth of field. So in my case, I'll change the focal distance, the focus distance to 100 units. And that gives me a very natural and realistic look. So we have some subtle depth of field. You can change the white balance. And there we go. That's how easy it is to create something like this in Unreal Engine 5. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, please leave a like down below. It really helps a lot. I'll see you in the next video.